I pulled into the lot just past midnight. The engines hummed fading into the quiet, like it didn't exist at all. The streetlights flickered, weak and tired, barely illuminating the cracked asphalt beneath my tires. Something about this place made my chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but a weight I couldn't name. The lot should have been empty. Always was at this hour. And yet, the headlights caught my eye before I even parked. Low beams far in the distance, moving just enough to suggest attention. I shook my head. Couldn't be. Nothing usually happened here. I'd walked these roads 100 times, tracing the same faded lines, checking the same rusted signs that threatened to fall if anyone touched them. Still, the light moved again, slow, deliberate, as if following me. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, counting the seconds it took for the beam to disappear behind a dumpster, only to peek out again a few steps further. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe another late-night driver. Maybe a neighbor checking their car. Rational explanations. The ones I always clung to. But then I noticed the shadows. Or maybe it was just the darkness stretching differently tonight. They didn't behave like ordinary shadows. They moved in the corner of my vision, just enough that every time I turned, they seemed to slip away, leaving nothing but the empty lot staring back. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The air was cold, sharp against my skin, carrying a metallic tang I couldn't identify. I scanned the perimeter. Nothing, just the rows of parked cars, each one silent, each one still. The distant headlights were gone, or had they never been there? I couldn't tell anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting a thin slice of yellow into the dark. It bounced over cracked pavement, the peeling paint on the parking blocks, and finally, the row of cars. Everything normal, safe, or at least that's what I told myself. But the deeper I walked, the more I felt it pressure in my chest, a heat at the back of my neck, like someone was standing just outside my line of sight, watching, waiting. I checked my radio. Static, brief flickers of sound, then silence. My partner should have been on, checking in every 15 minutes, but no voice answered. I tapped the device. Nothing. Maybe the battery was low, maybe a glitch. I had to hope. Hoping kept me moving, kept me walking, kept me from freezing where I stood, letting the shadows swallow me whole. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, soft, repetitive, coming from the far side of the lot, where the old storage sheds leaned like tired men against a chain-link fence. My heart picked up, thudding in my chest. I moved toward it, flashlight cutting through the darkness, every step raising the hair on the back of my neck. I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a loose trash bin, something mundane, something explainable. But when I rounded the last row of cars, I froze. The shed doors were slightly ajar, not swinging in the wind, just open. And inside, something shifted, just out of light's reach. A shape, dark against darker shadows, moving. I swallowed hard, telling myself again, probably a stray cat, but the shape didn't scamper or hiss. It waited, patient, watching. I swallowed again, trying to keep my voice steady. Hey, anyone there? Nothing. My words felt swallowed by the night, fading before they could hit the edges of the lot. The shape didn't move, didn't respond, but I could feel it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but my feet stayed planted. I wanted to believe it was nothing, had to believe it was nothing. Then the headlights appeared again. Same low beam, same deliberate crawl across the lot. My stomach dropped. Whoever had followed me here, waiting, patient, silent. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe the lot had a visitor, maybe someone checking on their car, but there was no sound, no engine, no footsteps, just light moving across the asphalt like it had a mind of its own. I started walking back toward my car, keeping the flashlight steady, trying to keep the beam between me and the shadows. That's when I noticed something else. Footprints, fresh, pressed into the gravel, leading away from the sheds toward the far end of the lot. Not mine, not anyone's I recognized. And they didn't look like human footprints exactly. Longer, thinner, maybe too wide in the heel. Odd, impossible. I froze. My mind ran through the possibilities. Animal, human, A trick of the light, but no, too deliberate, too calculated. Each step seemed measured, aware, purposeful. I followed them with my flashlight, tracing the path until it disappeared into the deeper darkness near the chain-link fence. A cold wind blew, rattling the metal signs overhead, making the shadows dance. I stepped back. The lot, which had felt almost benign a moment ago, now seemed alive, watching, waiting, and I realized with a sinking certainty that I wasn't alone. The headlights weren't moving randomly. They were following. They had been following me since I entered. My pulse raced. I want to call in to say something over the radio, but the device stayed dead. Static, a low, humming static that seemed to carry voices, whispered fragments. Nothing coherent, just enough to twist my stomach. I backed toward my car, hand hovering over the keys, ready to drive. But my headlights picked up something that made me stop dead. A figure, standing at the edge of the lot, just past the last row of cars. Not moving, not breathing. Or maybe it was hard to tell in the dark, but I could feel it looking at me. Patient, cold, and then, just as suddenly as I saw it, it was gone, vanished. My heart thundered, my breath coming in sharp, short bursts. I fumbled with the car door, finally getting inside, locking it as quickly as I could. The headlights outside remained, casting long, thin beams across the lot, but no figure. The radio crackled again, and for a moment, I thought I heard my own voice calling back to me, but distorted, slow, wrong. A whisper in my ear, though no one was there. I tried to convince myself it was nerves. First night jitters. The isolation of the graveyard shift. But I knew better. I could feel it. Something was in this lot, watching, waiting, and somehow it knew I noticed. I started the car, engine trembling under my hands, headlights cutting across the empty spaces. And I swear the beam on the asphalt moved differently, as if bending toward me, guiding me or warning me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I stayed. Had to. Part of me needed to see, needed to know. The radio crackled again. Short bursts this time. A single word. Don't. And then silence. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, eyes darting to every corner of the lot. The empty space felt heavier now, oppressive, like it had breathed in the darkness and exhaled it over me. I realized something. Whoever, or whatever, was here. It didn't want to leave, and it didn't want me to see fully. Only just enough to know it was there. Only just enough to make me doubt everything. I sat like that for what felt like hours, engine idling, headlights cutting through nothing, listening to the whisper of the wind, the crackle of the radio, an impossible quiet. And when the first hint of dawn painted the sky with gray streaks, I drove off, trying to convince myself it was over. But I knew, deep down, that the lot wasn't empty. It had never been empty, and I had already made a mistake. One mistake, walking into its gaze, noticing the light that wasn't just light, following the pattern that didn't belong. Something had marked me, and I didn't know how or when it would come for me again, and I knew it would. The moment I left my car, the lot seemed to stretch farther than it had a minute ago. Each step on the gravel echoed too loudly, bouncing back at me in a rhythm that didn't belong. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, the isolation playing tricks on me, but then I heard it, soft, uneven steps behind me. Not my own, not anyone I knew. They didn't match the crunch of my boots. I stopped, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam caught nothing but the usual rows of empty cars, their metal shells reflecting light, like dull eyes staring back. I waited, straining to hear, and the steps move again, closer, deliberate, careful. I turned, slowly, trying not to make my own noise, but the lot remained empty, just shadows, stretching and twitching as if the darkness itself had weight. I tried to reason it away. Could be a raccoon, a stray dog, but the sound didn't scuttle. It didn't dash. It paced, intentional, and then it stopped, perfectly in sync with me halting. My stomach sank. Whoever or whatever it was mimicking me, watching me. I moved again, this time deliberately, pacing toward the far end of the lot, trying to trace the old cracks in the asphalt like I had done 100 times. And the steps came back, soft at first, then louder as if adjusting to my rhythm. I glanced to my side, caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. Too quick, too precise to be a shadow cast by a streetlight. I spun, but nothing was there. Only empty lot, still cars, and that low hum of static from my radio. The steps resumed, closer now, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My chest tightened. I wanted to call out, to speak, to break the tension with sound, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I listened, every nerve alert, every instinct screaming to run. The lot had changed. It wasn't just dark. It was alive with expectation. Waiting. I tried to focus on familiar. The cracked asphalt, the peeling paint of the parking blocks, the rusted signs swaying lightly. But each step I took seemed to elongate the distance. The familiar shapes bending slightly, as if the lot itself was shifting around me. And then I heard a whisper, soft, almost a sigh. I froze again, hard in my throat. "Hello," I whispered back, voice small. Nothing, only the soft, deliberate steps echoing off the pavement. I started walking toward the sheds at the back of the lot, the place where I'd first felt the tension, the first night jitters of a graveyard shift turning into something heavier, more tangible. My flashlight cut across the sides of parked cars, bouncing off broken mirrors, smearing reflections that seemed just a little too slow. And I felt it again, the eyes, the attention, following me, not looking at me directly, but watching my pattern, tracking my motion like it was a puzzle it was trying to solve. A sudden breeze whispered across the lot, rattling loose trash and making the chain link fence groan. I froze, and the steps stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, first night paranoia, but my gut twisted. Something was here, somewhere just beyond sight, pacing me, studying me. I edged closer to the sheds, trying to keep the beam steady, scanning the shadows. That's when I noticed it. The footprints, fresh, pressing to the dirt and gravel near the shed doors. Not mine, not human. The prints were narrow, elongated, almost too perfect, like a single entity had decided to trace every step I had taken and then some. My stomach churned. I crouched to examine them, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The prints led nowhere. They ended abruptly in the shadow, as if whatever had made them had vanished into the air. My breath caught. I rose slowly, turning in a full circle, trying to catch anything, anyone. And that's when I saw it again. A flicker, a shadow stretching between two cars, vanishing the instant I blinked. My heart thudded painfully, my palms slick on the flashlight. I wanted to run. I wanted to drive away and pretend I'd imagined it, but a small, stubborn part of me refused to leave. Had to see, had to know. I moved along the row of cars, flashlight cutting arcs through the black. Every time I thought I had a clear path, the steps resumed, offset slightly from mine, echoing softly, deliberately, like a heartbeat just out of sync. I tried to call out again, louder this time, voice cracking. "Hey!" "Who's there?" Nothing answered, only the steps, pacing me like a predator, waiting for the right moment. The radio flickered to life for a brief second, a burst of static, then silence. But in that static, I could swear I heard a voice, my voice, drawn out slow, like it was imitating me. My stomach lurched. I gripped the radio tighter, but it stayed dead. Static whispered, then silence. Only the steps, only the shadow at the edge of the beam. Watching, waiting. I rounded the corner of the last row of cars and froze. The sheds loomed ahead, opened slightly as if inviting me in, and I noticed the shadows inside. Not static, not random, but moving against the walls like they were alive. A hand? Maybe. Or a shape that just wanted me to think it was. I took a careful step forward, each creak of gravel beneath my boots echoing unnaturally loud, and the steps behind me quickened, no longer mirroring me, but closing distance, almost impatient. I spun. Nothing. The lot was empty. Only the air, thick and heavy, buzzing faintly against my skin. I could feel eyes pressing into my back. Even though nothing was there, A whisper of motion in my peripheral vision, another flicker of light, and I realized it wasn't just one presence. Something else was here, hidden, moving in ways I couldn't track. And somehow, it knew I had noticed. I moved cautiously, edging along the far side of the shed, trying to peer around the corner. The shadows seemed to contract, withdrawing from the light, then expand when I moved away. I caught glimpses of shapes, tall, thin, impossible angles, but every time I blinked, they shifted. I started to wonder if my mind was fracturing, the isolation of the graveyard shift bending reality. But the footprints I had seen earlier, frozen in place in the gravel, reminded me that this was real. Something had been here. Something still was. My pulse thrummed painfully. I want to call in to tell someone, anyone, but the radio remained silent. My hand shook as I raised a flashlight, scanning the lot in a slow, deliberate circle. And I noticed it, the distant headlights again, creeping along the edge of the lot, illuminating nothing yet promising something. Whoever was had returned, tracing perimeter, never too close, never too far, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I froze mid-step, listening. The steps behind me now had a rhythm I recognized, almost human, but wrong, distorted. They matched mine, then slowed, then sped up like a mocking heartbeat echoing my own. I realized I'd been walking in circles without noticing, drawn by the lot itself, guided by some unseen hand. And then a whisper, just at the edge of hearing, my name, not loud, not clear, but distinct. It made my skin crawl. I started moving again, faster this time, toward my car, trying to shake the dread curling around my chest. The shadows danced, light flickered, the steps followed, now impatient. And as I reached the car, something made me glance back, between the rows of vehicles, just past the reach of my headlights. A figure, thin, dark, shifting, watched me. It didn't move, didn't blink, but I could feel its focus, its attention, heavy and pressing. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors, breathing hard. The lot stretched silent behind me, but I could still feel it there, watching, waiting. The footsteps had vanished, or maybe they had merged with the shadows, becoming part of the lot itself. I couldn't tell. I wanted to tell myself I was safe, that leaving would end this, but deep down I knew better. Something had marked me tonight, something that didn't like being ignored. And I knew, even before I started the engine, that the echoes of those steps wouldn't leave me, not until it decided I could. I reached the edge of the lot, flashlights sweeping across the familiar lines of parked cars, when something made me stop dead. One of the cars, an old sedan, rusted along the edges, hood dented. Wasn't where it had been when I entered the lot. I was certain of it. I remember the exact spot. Its tires were marked in the gravel. But now it had shifted, maybe 3 or 4 feet forward, angled toward the far gate like it had been waiting. My stomach clenched. I squinted, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows, maybe the uneven asphalt, maybe my exhaustion playing games with my mind. But no, the car was closer. I stepped toward it, the gravel crunching underfoot, and froze again. The headlights of my patrol car glinted off the hood, catching a reflection that didn't belong. Something, or someone, had touched it. The dent along the door seemed fresh. The paint looked scraped in a way I didn't remember. I reached for my radio, fingers shaking. Unit 4, do you copy? Anyone. The device crackled, then silence. I tried again, longer, more insistent. Nothing. I tapped it, then pressed it against my ear, straining. Dead. Normal static wouldn't have been this total. My pulse kicked into overdrive. The lot was empty, supposed to be empty, and yet the car had moved. It had to be someone or something. I circled the vehicle slowly, trying to see tire tracks or any sign of movement. Nothing. The gravel beneath the wheels showed no recent disturbance. No tracks leading up to it, none away from it. It had simply appeared there. I ran a hand along the hood, cold metal under my gloves, and felt a slight warmth near the passenger door, almost as if someone had been there very recently, very deliberately. A soft noise made me freeze again. Footsteps, but different this time. Slower, heavy, measured, from the far end of the lot. I swung the flashlight in that direction, catching only empty asphalt, the shadows bending unnaturally around the light. I could feel something observing, pressing from the edges of my vision. I turned back to the sedan. No one was there, and yet the air around it seemed charged, like the space itself remembered movement I couldn't see. I leaned closer to the car window, frosted with dust, smudged fingerprints streaking across it. I wiped a small circle clean with my glove, and my breath caught. The print on the glass wasn't mine. Too long, too narrow, fingers impossibly thin. I snapped back, my heart racing. There had been someone, or something, inside the lot with me, and it wasn't here now. The radio buzzed again, faint, static, then a whisper. I couldn't tell if it was real or my imagination. A single word seemed to form out of the crackle. Leave. My fingers tightened around the radio. My brain screamed to obey, to get back to the car and leave the lot, but a stubborn part of me wouldn't. Had to see. Had to know. I stepped back, shining the flashlight across the rows of cars. Shadows pooled, deep and thick, moving just slightly. Something shifted in the corner of my vision, a reflection off a side mirror, a shape that didn't belong. I spun. Nothing. But the car, my focus kept returning to it, seemed different. The angle, the presence, the way it sat, almost deliberate. Waiting. I decided to circle the lot, keeping the vehicle in view. The steps behind me had returned now, soft but sure, echoing my own movements, keeping pace just out of reach. I moved faster. The sedan stayed put. Not a wheel turned. Not a mirror shifted. But every time I glanced at it, I felt like I wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to cling closer, brush against me, whisper against my neck. I crouched beside the car, flashlight low to the ground. Tires, undisturbed, gravel intact. No tracks anywhere. My mind spun. How had it moved? How had it arrived here without a trace? I reached out to touch the driver's door again, hesitating as I did. My reflection in the window looked wrong, stretched, elongated, blinked. A flicker in the corner of the glass made me jump back. Nothing. I told myself it was exhaustion, nerves. The lot was quiet, empty, safe, and yet a faint noise from the lot's edge made me pivot. Another vehicle? No, nothing moving, nothing there. But the feeling intensified, weight in the air, pressure behind me. Watching. I could feel it. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed that I should run. But I couldn't. I had to understand. I had to trace the movement. Find a reason. I walked slowly around the sedan again, flashlight cutting arcs through the black. Dust kicked up, swirling like mist. A long scratch along the hood caught the light. Fresh. Not there when I arrived. I crouched, inspecting it. The metal seemed almost pliable, like something had bent it with purpose. My fingers trembled, and then I saw it. A small imprint near the tire, faint. Too thin to be human, too perfect to be accidental. Someone or something had been precise, careful, watching. The lot felt alive. The shadows moved with intention, shifting as I circled. I felt my heart beat in my throat, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. And then the footsteps started again, slower, deliberate, but this time circling me, not echoing me, but threading between me and the car, like it was guiding me, testing me. I swallowed hard. I wanted to run. Every fiber of me screamed it, but I was trapped in curiosity and necessity, in that stubborn part of me that needed answers. I leaned over the hood again, flashlight tracing the dent. I felt the metal shiver under my glove, subtle, almost imperceptible. I jerked back, breathing hard. Was it moving? Could it move? My mind screamed at me, absurd, irrational, but the sensation was real. Pressure, awareness, something behind the metal, something beneath the asphalt, something watching. I glanced around the lot again. Headlights. They were back, creeping along the edges, casting the long shadows that seemed impossibly tall. No vehicle, no person, just light moving like a living thing. I realized then that I hadn't noticed before. The shadows cast by the headlights didn't match anything in the lot. They stretched too long, twisted unnaturally, as if reaching for me. I backed away from the sedan, keeping my flashlight trained on it. The steps circled again, closer this time. Not my own, not echoing me, but deliberate. I turned sharply. Empty lot. But when I looked back at the car, it seemed different again. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it wasn't just parked differently. Maybe it had been alive in some way I couldn't comprehend. The radio buzzed again, louder this time. A static whisper. Stop. My heart leapt. I gripped it tighter, hands sweating. Then silence. Nothing else. Just me, the sedan, the creeping shadows, the lot, impossibly quiet but alive with unseen attention. I realized something then. Whoever, or whatever, was here didn't want to leave, and it didn't want me to see fully. Just enough to know. Just enough to understand that it had power here. That the lot itself, the shadows, the vehicles, they all belonged to something I couldn't see, but I could feel, and I had stepped inside its awareness. I backed toward my car slowly, flashlight sweeping between the sedan and the rows of darkness. Every step seemed magnified, every shadow alive. The footsteps behind me stopped. Silence. I risked a glance at the sedan one last time. Nothing visible, but the dent, the scratch, the faint imprint, they were enough. Evidence that I wasn't imagining this, that something had moved the car. Something had been here, unseen, precise. I got into my patrol car, slamming the door. The sedan stayed there, silent, waiting, somehow knowing I had noticed. The radio stayed dead. The lot stretched infinite behind me. Shadows curling and twisting in ways that didn't obey physics. I wanted to start the engine and drive away, and I did. But even as I pulled forward, the image of the sedan, slightly closer than it should have been, burned into my mind, and I knew I would never forget. I froze before the last row of cars, flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade, every nerve screaming that I wasn't alone. The lot had shifted again, or maybe I had. Shadows pooled thicker than ever, crawling along the cracked asphalt, brushing the edges of my boots, tugging at my skin. And then I saw it, a pair of eyes, not glowing, not animal, human, or close enough to trick my mind into believing they were. They stared in the shadows between two old sedans, barely visible yet undeniable, cold, unblinking, patient. I could feel them pressing to the darkness, probing me, reading my every move. My chest tightened. My palms were slick. I told myself to step back, to put distance between me and whatever it was. But something, curiosity, fear, a stupid stubborn need to understand, kept my feet rooted. The flashlight flickered. I swung it slightly, tried to catch the figure, but it didn't move, didn't even blink, just watched. I held my breath. The lot felt alive, every crack in the asphalt, every rusted sign, vibrating with attention. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone hiding, waiting for a joke, a prank. But the weight of the gaze was real, too precise, too deliberate. I took a slow step forward. The eyes didn't flinch. And that's when I noticed it. The air around them shimmered slightly, heat rippling, or maybe it was just my vision bending. But the figure didn't sit fully in the shadows. It existed between them. A liminal space that shouldn't have been possible. I swallowed hard. Something here didn't obey ordinary rules. I glanced around, half expecting movement elsewhere, but the lot stretched silent and empty. The distant headlights from before had vanished, leaving only the weak, flickering glow of the street lamps. Shadows shifted unnaturally at the edges of my vision, lengthening and compressing as if they had their own awareness. I could feel every hair on my arms and neck standing on end, the cold pressing deeper, almost tactile. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. I could see a faint outline of a head, shoulders, maybe a torso, but everything else blended into darkness. No features, no face, just intent. It made my stomach churn. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to leave the lot forever. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something had me pinned, not physically, but with attention, and I hated myself for it. I tried to raise the radio again, voice shaking. Unit 4, do you copy? Anyone out there? Silence. Just the static that never resolved. Then a faint whisper, barely audible over the crackle. My own name, drawn out, slow, wrong. My blood ran cold. I dropped the radio to my side, heart thudding painfully. Someone or something knew I was here, had been watching me for longer than I realized. I edged sideways, keeping the flashlight trained on the shadowed figure. My boots crunch against gravel, echoing across the empty lot, and the eyes followed. Every movement I made, every tiny adjustment, they mirrored, but not perfectly, almost playful, in a cruel, deliberate way. My mind scrambled. How long had it been here? Had it moved while I wasn't looking? Or had it always been there, hiding in the blind spots my eyes couldn't catch? I tried to speak again, my voice barely a whisper. Who's there? No answer, just the weight of observation pressing on me, thick, tangible. I stepped closer, forcing my flashlight toward the shadow. The beam hit nothing, no figure, no body, just the empty space between the cars. My pulse hammered in my ears. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, the outline was back, slightly shifted, closer. I stumbled back, heart racing, and tripped over something low to the ground. Gravel sprayed under my boots. I yelped. The figure didn't flinch, didn't react, just watched. I realized then that whatever was, it didn't need to move to exert control. Presence alone was enough. Awareness alone was enough. And I was at its mercy. The radio crackled again. A whisper this time. Clearer. Not a word. Just a hiss that pressed into my mind, making my teeth ache. I backed further, flashlight trembling in my grip. Every step I took seemed to stretch the lot, elongating the distance between me and safety. And yet, the figure stayed at the same distance, eyes locked, unyielding. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Rational thoughts. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe a person, maybe a reflection, maybe my imagination, fraying under hours of isolation. But the footprints, the moving car, the whispering radio, none of it was imagination. It had been real, and now it was here, watching, waiting. I edged toward my patrol car, flashlight sweeping over the lot. Shadows stretched unnaturally between the vehicles. I could hear the faint hum of static from the radio, like low breathing. The eyes were still there in the dark between two sedans, unblinking, impossible. My body wanted to flee, but my mind, stupid and curious, couldn't look away. A sudden flicker of movement made me spin. Another figure? No, just a trick of light. But it wasn't alone. I realized the shadows themselves seemed to twitch independently, like they had their own life, coiling around the cars, around the lot, always edging closer without ever stepping forward. My chest tightened. The lot wasn't empty. Not ever. And I had walked straight into it. I crouched behind my car, flashlight low, trying to hide, though I knew it wouldn't help. The figure's eyes were fixed on me, unwavering. I held my breath. Every instinct told me to run, but the lot, it seemed to hum with expectation, as if it knew I was here, as if it was testing me. I couldn't leave yet, couldn't risk moving without understanding. Then something changed. The eyes shifted slightly, a tilt of the head, a subtle narrowing. Awareness sharpened, and I realized a jolt. The figure wasn't just watching. It was learning, tracking my rhythm, anticipating my movements. Every step I had taken, every glance, every breath. It had cataloged, stored, and now adjusted its presence accordingly. I shivered. The radio hissed again, static forming a shape, a sound that almost became a word. Closer. I wanted to drop it, throw it, smash it, but I couldn't. Curiosity, that damned human curiosity, rooted me in place. I needed to see, needed to understand, but the weight and the darkness pressed down on me, oppressive, insistent, almost alive. I peeked around the hood of my patrol car. The lot looked empty, nothing between the rows of vehicles. But when I flicked the flashlight toward the corner where the eyes had been, they were gone, just black space, void. And yet, I felt them, felt the presence, wrapping around the lot like smoke, inescapable, patient. A sudden movement, a shadow flick, impossible to track, made me spin. The eyes were back, just slightly off from before, angled differently, unblinking. My breath caught in my throat. I realized something horrifying. I hadn't lost them. They had never left. And I hadn't been watching them. They had been watching me, always, even in the spaces where my eyes couldn't reach. I backed up again, slowly, deliberately, flashlight trained. Shadows stretched unnaturally at the edges of the beam. The lot had become a maze of light and dark. Each step forward folding space. Each glance warping perception. I could feel every heartbeat, every intake of breath, magnified by the silent attention pressing from shadows. The radio crackled one final time. A whisper, this time unmistakable. "You see me?" My blood froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only stare at the darkness, knowing, finally, fully, that the eyes weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for something else. Something I couldn't name. Something I couldn't outrun. I gripped the patrol car door. Tried to convince myself to leave. Tried to convince myself that rationality still existed. That morning would come and everything would be normal again. But the eyes didn't blink. They didn't shift. And the shadows moved closer, curling at the edges of my vision. I slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors. Flashlight across the dash. Eyes fixed in the darkness outside. I tried to start the car, but the engine hesitated, trembling like my own pulse. When it caught, the headlights cut across the empty lot, revealing only familiar shapes. The eyes were gone or maybe hidden, but I knew they hadn't left. They were waiting, patient, and aware. And as I pulled out of the lot, I realized something I couldn't unhear, couldn't unsee. Whatever watched me had not been human, not fully. It had existed in the spaces between shadows, in the silent spaces my mind refused to acknowledge. And it had followed me, tracking, waiting, knowing. I didn't look back, not until I reached the edge of the lot, until the shadows receded, until the weight lifted slightly from my chest. But deep down I knew I would see them again, eyes in the dark, watching, waiting, always waiting. I drove past the last streetlight, engine low and steady, repeating the address in my head like a mantra. 423 Elmwood Drive. That was what dispatch had given me. Routine check, a noise complaint, nothing serious. I should have been relaxed, even bored, but the second I turned onto the side street, a chill crawled up my spine. The road was narrower than the map indicated, overgrown trees pressing from both sides, branches scraping the roof of the patrol car. Patches of fog rolled across the asphalt, soft and wet, clinging to the headlights. I slowed, scanning the edges, expecting a house, a porch, a mailbox. Nothing, just darkness. And the smell, wet leaves, rotting wood, something faintly metallic that made my stomach knot. I double-checked the address. Dispatch confirmed it again. Elmwood Drive, 423. They promised it was correct. I frowned at the GPS. The screen blinked, recalculating, but it hesitated, like it didn't know where to lead me. Elmwood Drive existed on the map, yes, but the numbers, they didn't match anything visible. I drove slowly, tires crunching over dead leaves and gravel. Every shadow stretched too long, every curve of the road pressing in. Then I saw it, a flicker of light through the fog, a porch lamp, dim, barely alive. Relief hit me first. Finally, a house. I pulled up, engine idling, but the relief didn't last. The house wasn't right. Not at all. It was set back far from the road, larger than anything I expected, walls gray and peeling. Windows dark, not reflecting the light properly. The lamp swayed, but there was no wind. I swallowed. My stomach tightened. Something about it felt off. I grabbed my flashlight. Radio clipped to my shoulder. Unit 4 dispatch, I'm on scene. My voice sounded small, weak even to me. Static hissed back, no response. Typical, I told myself. Maybe the fog, maybe weak signal. I stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. The air was thick, cold, and smelled faintly of wet wood and smoke. No sound came from the house. Not a creak, not a whistle of wind. Just the distant hum of the patrol car's engine. I approached the porch. My flashlight cut across the steps, catching the peeling paint. The warped wood. Mailbox, empty. Numbers on the post, 423. Confirmed. I glanced back at the road. No neighbors, no other houses visible, not even a fence. Just forest pressing in on both sides. Something deep inside me tightened. This wasn't a routine check. I could feel it. I reached for the doorknob. Cold metal slick under my glove. I turned it, locked. Of course. I knocked. Hard. The sound echoed to the empty air, bouncing off invisible walls, amplifying my unease. Nothing. I called out, voice steadier than I felt. Police. I'm here for a complaint. Silence. I circled the house, flashlight scanning every angle. Windows dark, reflecting nothing. Shadows pool beneath the roofline, stretching unnaturally. The siding looked warped, older than it should be, edges curling in ways that seemed almost intentional. I stepped closer to one of the side windows and crouched, peering inside. Nothing. Absolute darkness. And yet, I could feel it watching me. A presence. Waiting. I stood, heart hammering. Radio still dead. Footsteps, mine, echoed too loudly across the gravel. And then another sound. Soft, deliberate, behind the house. I spun. Flashlight cut into the fog, but nothing moved. Just more shadows. I gripped the flashlight tighter, awareness sharpening, senses stretching. Something wasn't right here. Not human, not ordinary. I tried calling dispatch again. Static, no response. My pulse thundered. I stepped toward the back of the house. Flashlight sweeping. Gravel, broken branches, moss-covered steps leading down to nothing. A faint outline of a door, barely visible, warped and crooked. My stomach churned. Doors didn't get like that by accident. Something about it felt deliberate, malicious. A sound came then, soft, metal scraping against metal. My breath caught. I swung the light toward it. Nothing, but my gut twisted. The sound had direction, origin, intent. I edged closer, boot crunching against gravel. The sound stopped the moment I froze. Perfect timing. Too perfect. My pulse spiked. Something here was aware. Watching. Testing. I stepped back, trying to rationalize. Could be a raccoon. Could be a loose shutter. Anything. But the weight in the air didn't lie. It wasn't just observation. It was deliberate. Heavy. Pressing down on me. Pressing into my chest, into my skull. The house wasn't empty. Not in any way I could accept. I circled the front again. Flashlight sweeping over warped boards. There, on the porch railing, a handprint. Fresh. Dark against the pale wood. I froze. Nothing else. No footprints leading to it. No indication of who or what. Just a print, perfectly formed. I leaned closer. Fingertips long, narrow, elegant, almost not human. I stumbled back, gripping my flashlight harder, heart hammering in my chest. The fog shifted suddenly, low and crawling along the ground. The air thickened, smelled stronger now. Damp wood, rot, faint iron. I felt the hair on my arm stand, a crawling sensation along my spine. Something moved inside me. Fear, yes, but deeper. Unease, the kind that drills into your stomach and won't let go. I backed toward the car slowly, keeping my eyes on the house. Windows dark, unyielding. The porch empty. Yet I could feel it. Something in there, somewhere not human, pressing attention toward me. I tried to force rational thought, but the impressions from the moving car earlier, the steps, the shadows, they all converged. A pattern I couldn't ignore. A creak sounded then, soft, deliberate, from the side of the house. Floorboards? Maybe. Or a door shifting slightly, responding to me. I stepped closer, flashlight swinging. Nothing visible. And yet, the weight pressed harder, like the air itself had substance. I realized with a chill, it wasn't hiding. It didn't need to. It existed in the spaces my eyes didn't reach, in the corners, in the silence. Watching, waiting. I inched forward toward the crooked back door. Another sound. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, though no one could be there. My pulse spiked. I called out again, voice trembling. Police, this is a routine check. Silence. And then a whisper, barely audible. Faint, almost thought-like. Not through the radio. Through the air. Through my mind. Leave. I froze. My heart thudded painfully. I tried to reason, to tell myself it was exhaustion, fog, nerves, but my instinct screamed, wrong. Everything about this place was wrong. Wrong address, wrong house, wrong feeling. The street didn't exist where it should. The map lied. The house, it wasn't on any property listing, no records, nothing. And now it was real. In front of me, watching me. I backed toward the car again, flashlight scanning the edges. Shadows moved just slightly. A twitch in the corner of the porch, a flicker behind the windows. I swallowed hard. It was patient, waiting. It didn't need to reveal itself fully, just enough to remind me I wasn't in control. I climbed into the patrol car, doors locked, engine started, headlights cutting through the low fog. I glanced back once. The house sat there, empty, silent, unchanged. And yet, I knew it had shifted somehow. Presence, awareness, something inside or around or beneath it, pressing attention toward me. I radioed dispatch one last time, voice steady despite my shaking hands. Static, no reply. I drove slowly back toward the main road, headlights cutting arcs of fog. But I didn't dare look back again. Elmwood Drive disappeared behind me, swallowed by the night. And yet, I couldn't shake it. The house wasn't on any map, no record of its existence. But I had seen it, felt it, known its presence. I realized chillingly that some places don't obey rules. Some addresses are wrong for a reason, and some houses wait for the right person. I slowed the patrol car as I entered the next stretch of Elmwood Drive. The fog had thickened, curling around the tires like smoke, making the yellow lines on the asphalt blur. Streetlights popped up at uneven intervals, their halos swallowed by mist. I flicked on the headlights and noticed something immediately. Mailboxes, not just a few, not the occasional scatter. A row, dozens of them, lining the street like silent sentinels. The numbers were wrong. Random. 7, then 42, 3, 99. None sequential, none logical. And the names, my stomach sank. Each mailbox bore a name, handwritten, carved, etched, familiar. Faces I couldn't place, memories I shouldn't have. My own mother's maiden name. The name of a childhood friend I'd lost touch with. My high school English teacher. My pulse hitched. I tried to rationalize it. Could be coincidence. Could be someone's sick joke. But something about the fog, the silence, the way the mailboxes stretched into the distance like teeth, made my skin crawl. I rolled the car to a stop, engine idling, flashlight resting on the dash, hand hovering near the door. Every instinct screamed to move, to keep going, but I couldn't. Not yet. Curiosity and dread tangled, each feeding the other. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into damp leaves along the curb. My flashlight beam fell across the first few mailboxes. Names handwritten, some in faded ink, some carved deep into wood. I ran my fingers along one. Cold, smooth, real. The name was familiar, impossibly so, and my throat closed with dry, urgent panic. How could it be here? Why here? The next mailbox caught my eye. Another name, another memory. A fragment of a past I hadn't thought about in years. I glanced down the row. They went on forever, stretching in the fog, names blurring, merging, becoming unrecognizable yet frighteningly intimate. A creeping unease settled over me, heavy and almost physical. I shined the flashlight on numbers. None followed logic. Some repeated, some skipped, some seemed to move, almost imperceptibly, shifting between glances. My pulse thumped in my ears. The light flickered across the mist, revealing shapes behind the mailboxes. Dark, tall, unnaturally still. Shadows of branches. Maybe, maybe not. I backed toward the car, flashlight cutting across the fog. But something drew me forward. A single mailbox at the far end, isolated, smaller, almost childlike. I approached it slowly. The name scratched into its side made my chest tighten. It wasn't just familiar, it was mine. My own full name, carved in jagged, uneven letters. I froze, hand hovering over the wood. Breath caught, the fog thickened, pressing close. A whisper brushed my ear, faint, deliberate, You shouldn't be here. I spun. Nothing. Just fog. The road stretched empty. Headlights cutting through mist. But no one. My breath fogged in air. My pulse raced. My stomach churned. Each mailbox seemed to twitch subtly under the flashlight, almost imperceptibly. Shadows shifted, deeper and darker the edges. I wanted to flee, to leave Elmwood Drive behind forever. But I couldn't. Curiosity and fear held me, riveted to this strange, impossible street. I moved to the next mailbox, names flickering in the beam. Another face I knew, another memory I hadn't wanted to remember. I reached out, fingers brushing the carved letters. Cold, smooth. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the fog had weight. My ears picked up faint noises, metal creaking, leaves rustling, whispers just beyond comprehension. Nothing I could place. The radio clicked, faint static, then silence. My name, whispered again, not through the speaker. Through the air, through my skull, I staggered back, heart hammering. What was this place? Elmwood Drive had houses, right? Maps, records, addresses. Yet here I was, surrounded by mailboxes, impossible numbers, names I shouldn't recognize, and no houses. Just fog, silence, and the pressure being watched. I glanced down the row again. The mailboxes seemed to bend slightly toward me, tilting as if leaning in. The fog swirled at their bases, coiling around the posts like fingers. My flashlight caught movement. A shadow slipped behind a mailbox, tall, thin, inhumanly still. I jerked the light toward it. Nothing, yet I could feel it. Presence. Patient. Watching. Testing. Another whisper, closer this time. Leave. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root hidden under the leaves. My mind scrambled. Could be a prank? Some local kids playing on my nerves? No. Too precise. Too deliberate. This felt alive. The fog, the mailboxes, the names, they weren't random. Someone or something had arranged this. And now I was a target. I moved toward my car again, flashlight shaking. Each step felt longer, heavier, like the street itself resisted me. Mailboxes stretched endlessly on either side, shadows growing deeper, curling into the fog. Shapes moved just beyond vision, teasing me, hinting at form without revealing it. I realized then, this street didn't exist in the normal sense. It was somewhere else, or maybe between places, a liminal space. I forced my hand to reach one more mailbox, the one just beyond my patrol car. The name there made me freeze cold. Not mine, not familiar in a comforting way, but the name of someone I knew had died years ago, suddenly, without warning, before their time. My stomach twisted. I staggered back, heartbeat screaming in my ears. How could their name appear here, in this impossible street of moving fog and whispering shadows? The fog swirled around my boots. The air grew colder, more oppressive, like the weight of 100 eyes pressing down. I swung my flashlight. Shapes moved again, closer, just on the edges. Not human, not animal, but something aware. It leaned in, silent, patient, waiting for me to understand my place on Elmwood Drive. I realized I hadn't looked at the road behind me. I turned, and the patrol car seemed farther than I remembered, headlights barely cutting through the mist. Mailboxes shifted slightly as I watched, numbers rearranging themselves, names blurring, coalescing, splitting. Impossible geometry. My pulse thundered. I could feel the weight of it, of Elmwood Drive itself, bending reality around me. I radioed dispatch again. Static, my own voice muffled, faint, then clear whispering, but not from the radio, from the fog itself. Go home, before it remembers you. I stepped back, nearly tripping again, heart hammering, eyes darting. The street stretched endlessly. Mailboxes leaned closer, names familiar, impossible, intimate. Shadows moved between the posts, coiling, curling, watching. I understood suddenly. This street didn't just hold mail. It held memory, presence. It collected people, names, faces, and now it had me. I climbed back into the patrol car, doors locking automatically. Headlights cut swaths through the fog, But the street stretched beyond visibility, endless, impossible. Mailboxes flickered in the beam, names shifting, familiar faces staring back, and I realized, stomach twisting, that I wasn't leaving Elmwood Drive empty-handed. Somehow, someway, Elmwood Drive knew me. Every secret, every lost memory, every person I had ever loved or lost. It remembered, and now I would remember it, too. Every mailbox a fragment of history I wasn't supposed to touch. Every shadow a reminder that the street was alive, patient, and watching. I drove slowly, heart hammering, fog pressing close, headlights cutting only a few feet ahead. Elmwood Drive stretched on, numbers shifting, names flickering in the beam. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't, but I felt the weight of it. Presence, awareness, inevitability. The mailboxes waited for the next person. I had survived for now. Barely. But Elmwood Drive remembered, and it would remember me. I pulled into the cul-de-sac, headlights cutting through the fog like knives. But the shapes around me seemed to shift, blurring in the mist. Elmwood Drive had become a labyrinth of mailboxes, shadows, and whispers. Each name carved, etched familiar and impossible. I had hoped that leaving the row of mailboxes behind would end the strange sensations pressing against my mind. I had hoped wrong. The house I was dispatched to, a simple complaint, nothing serious, loomed ahead. On paper, it was routine. A thin, aging structure, 2 stories, paint peeling, a porch sagging like it carried decades of weight. But as I stepped out of the car, I realized the walls themselves seemed thinner than they should be, almost fragile, as though sound passed through them with ease, carrying secrets not meant for me. The night was quiet, too quiet. Even the distant hum of traffic was gone, swallowed by the fog. I crossed the yard slowly, boots sinking into soft soil. Every step made me aware of the silence that surrounded the house, a silence so complete it pressed against my ears. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the cracks in the siding, tiny gaps where the wind might whisper, or something else. I stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned beneath my weight, though the sound seemed muffled, distant, almost inside my head rather than beneath my feet. I raised the flashlight, scanning the windows. Curtains hung, drawn tight, yet I felt it immediately. The first whisper, faint, almost inaudible, seeping through the wall. "Don't look." I froze. My hand tightened on the flashlight, knuckles white. I turned slowly, expecting a trick of the wind, a branch scraping against the siding. Nothing, just the house, dark, immobile, waiting. My pulse quickened. That whisper, thin, deliberate, had clarity. It had intent, and it had come from inside. I pressed my ear to the door, cold, hard, unyielding, and yet I heard more, a stream of soft murmurs, layered, overlapping, voices speaking words I should never hear, names I recognized, places I'd never told anyone about, secrets I had buried so deep I had convinced myself they didn't exist. The walls spoke them anyway. I stepped back, flashlight trembling. My mind scrambled. Could it be a radio somewhere? A neighbor with a weird habit? No, these voices were inside the walls, coming through the thin wood, through the paint, through the floorboards. They whispered as if the house itself remembered me, remembered everything, and now it spoke. The voices shifted, louder, clearer, urgent. Look, deeper, remember? I stumbled backward, heart pounding. My brain fought logic, clawed at reason. Houses didn't whisper, walls didn't speak. Yet here I was frozen, flashlight cutting a shaky beam across the porch and yard, listening as the house rattled with secrets. My own memories, half forgotten, half denied, now being replayed back to me in a chorus I could neither ignore nor comprehend. I tried the door. Locked, of course. I knocked, softly, cautiously, each tap echoing unnaturally, traveling through space and fog. The whispers paused. A single, clear word floated through the air. Inside. I staggered back. Inside? My instinct screamed to leave, to drive, to run from this impossible house and the impossible street. But curiosity and duty tethered me. Some part of me had to see, had to confront whatever held these walls together, whatever listened and watched and whispered. I circled the porch, Flashlight cutting across the warp boards. Windows reflected the beam, but something was off. The reflections weren't quite right. Shadows lingered where none should be. Shapes twisted at the edges of vision. Impossible geometry, impossible angles, and always faintly, the voices threading to the boards, whispering just beyond comprehension. Names, fears, fragments of my own life, fragments I hadn't dared admit. I found a side window, cracked slightly, leaning close. I pressed my ear against the cold glass. The whispers intensified, threading together into phrases I shouldn't know. Old mistakes, old loves, regrets long buried. Each syllable sank into me like cold water. My hands shook. I tried to step back, but the porch seemed longer than it should have been, the shadows stretching into fog and impossibility. Do you remember? Yes, I remembered. Memories I hadn't wanted returned now clawed at me, stripped bare by the voice of the house. Faces, places, sounds, emotions I'd packed away. And yet it wasn't just memory. It was awareness, deliberate probing. The walls weren't passive. They were active. They were watching, choosing what to reveal, when to reveal it. Just enough to unnerve, just enough to draw me in. I stepped back, flashlight swinging. Something moved inside. I didn't see it, not clearly. Just a shift, a shadow at the far corner, a glimmer through the curtain. And then the whispering changed. Not fragments, not memories. Words meant for me. Personal, intimate. Secrets I had never spoken aloud. You shouldn't have come here. The words were low, deliberate. I swallowed, heart hammering, ears straining. My hands felt clammy. The fog pressed against the house, curling around my boots, through the gaps in the boards, touching me. I felt it. Pressure, weight, awareness. The house was alive, not in the way buildings are, but in the way predators are live, patient, deliberate, hungry for recognition. I tried to call dispatch again. Static, nothing else. No voice, no reassurance, no reply. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. Every instinct screamed to leave. Every logical thought dissolved under the weight of the whispers. And then a new sound. Footsteps. Inside. Soft, deliberate, pacing just beyond the walls. I froze, flashlight swinging, searching. The house offered nothing. The voices continued, now layering over the footsteps. Closer, closer, you could not hide. I stumbled back toward the car. Each step was deliberate, careful. The porch seemed longer now, the board stretching, bending impossibly beneath my feet. Shadows twisted in corners. Not quite reflections, not quite reality. The house breathed around me, whispering secrets, speaking to the walls in a voice that belonged neither to the past nor the present, but to somewhere outside normal time. I climbed into a patrol car, doors locking, headlights cutting through fog. And even then, inside the car, the whispers didn't stop. Thin, teasing, intimate, curling into the cabin, threading into my ears. Names, places, regrets, threats, memories I hadn't admitted to myself, memories I thought forgotten, now shouted into consciousness. I drove slowly, headlights barely cutting through fog, pulse hammering. The house receded, but its presence clung. I realized something impossible. The voices had followed me, not physically, but inside me, imprinted themselves. The house didn't just whisper through walls. It whispered to the mind, threading awareness, threading memory, threading fear. Elmwood Drive had become a vessel, a collector, a recorder, a predator, and I had become its next listener, its next participant. Each house, each mailbox, each impossible address. It remembered, it spoke, it waited. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Shadows curled at the edges of the fog. Names whispered on the wind. And I knew, as certainly as a heartbeat, that what I heard tonight would stay with me. Not just in memory, not just in fear, but in presence. The voices through the walls had found a home inside me. I drove on, unable to shake it. The whispers weren't ending. They were learning, watching, remembering. And I couldn't escape, not truly. Not from Elmwood Drive, not from the house, not from the voices, The door creaked like it had been waiting for me, groaning on old hinges as I pushed it open. The air hit me first, stale, dry, like a coffin sealed for years. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, shimmering like tiny fireflies trapped in a cage. My boots crunch against debris scattered across the floor, loose plaster, old papers, a forgotten shoe that had long lost its pair. Nothing stirred, and yet the silence pressed against my ears like water in a deep well. I stepped inside slowly, scanning the hallway. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like the fingers of a hand reaching for me. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fatigue, but from the weight of anticipation, the strange, growing knowledge that something in this house was aware. I could almost feel it watching me, just beyond the edges of my vision, in the shadows that seemed too deep, too purposeful. Rooms unfolded in a predictable pattern. Living room, kitchen, dining room, but all were empty, stripped bare of life. Dust covered every surface, the furniture coated in sheets that blurred their shapes, turning chairs and tables into strange, hunched figures frozen mid-motion. I ran my hand along the banister. It was dry and brittle. Tiny splinters embedded themselves in my skin. Tiny reminders that I was intruding, that this house did not welcome visitors. I paused at a doorway, flashlight sweeping across the floor. Something caught my eye, footprints in the dust. Small, delicate, adult size, leading down the hallway and disappearing around the corner. My stomach knotted. No one should have been here. The house had been abandoned, or at least that's what every record, every dispatch note had said. And yet the footprints were fresh, impossible to ignore. I followed them cautiously, breath shallow. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing back at me from the walls like whispers I couldn't understand. The living room was empty, the fireplace cold. Nothing stirred, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Not entirely. That presence, indefinable, patient, was somewhere close, just out of sight, observing every move I made. A sudden draft made the curtains shiver. I froze. The window had been closed, sealed for years, and yet the cold seeped in, carrying a faint scent, wood smoke, or maybe decay. I couldn't tell. My eyes darted around, searching for the source, but found only the same dusty furniture, the same peeling walls, the same creeping sense that the house itself was breathing around me. I moved deeper into the hallway, flashlight cutting a narrow path through the gloom. Every door I passed whispered possibilities. Rooms that had once been bedrooms, bathrooms, a study, all empty, all silent, and yet the unease thickened, curling around my spine, pressing at the back of my mind. I tried to focus on reality, dust, empty rooms, peeling paint. But the mind doesn't always follow reason in places like this. Shadows move where they shouldn't. Sounds came from where they couldn't. And a pressure in my chest told me that this house remembered more than it should. In the study, papers littered the floor in a chaotic sprawl. I stepped carefully, scanning the room. The desk was overturned, drawers pulled open as if someone or something had rifled through them recently. My heart quickened. There should have been no one here. There should have been only dust and decay. Yet the signs of presence were undeniable. Footprints, moved furniture, the faint impression of hands on the desk's edge, wiped clean of dust in places. I bent down to examine the papers. There were old letters, yellowed with age, words faded, addresses scratched out. But one thing struck me in name. My name, or at least a close variation. Handwritten in careful, deliberate letters, in a hand I did not recognize, but somehow felt familiar. My pulse jumped. How could this be? Who would write my name here? The thought scraped at the edges of my sanity. A creep behind me made me spin. Nothing, just shadows stretching in corners, long and unnatural. My flashlight trembled in my grip. I had been trained for fear, trained for danger, trained to keep calm. And yet, the house laughed at training, at reason. It held its own rules, and my presence was a breach of them. I realized I was not searching for answers. The house was searching me, testing me, learning what I would fear, what I would notice, what I would question. I moved toward the staircase. It groaned under my weight, each step complaining, echoing through the hollow frame of the house. Upstairs was worse. Narrower hallways, darker shadows, the air heavier, almost suffocating. I passed bedrooms, their doors hanging ajar, revealing empty beds covered in dust, mirrors clouded and broken, and yet in each room I felt it. Presence, watching, waiting, whispering. My imagination, I told myself. Rational thought, yet the sensation was too precise, too intimate, too personal to be imagined. I reached the end of the hallway. A door unremarkable, slightly ajar. I approached slowly, flashlight sweeping across the floor. Dust patterns seemed to shift, forming vague, fleeting shapes that disappeared when I blinked. My hand hovered over the doorknob. The air here was colder, almost biting, carrying that faint, indefinable scent again. I opened the door slowly. Inside was a nursery. Empty cribs, toys scattered across the floor, a mobile hanging from the ceiling. The dust here was thicker, heavier, as though this room had not been entered in decades. Yet the air was alive with expectation, with a kind of quiet anticipation. And then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I could have imagined it, threading through the room like a breeze. "Why are you here?" The voice was inside my head, yet carried the inflection of the room itself. I spun, flashlight cutting every corner, expecting someone, anything, nothing. The crib sagged with dust, toys unmoving. The room held its breath, and yet the unease deepened, curling into my gut, twisting it into knots. The house wasn't just empty. It wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. I backed out of the nursery slowly, senses on high alert. The hallway beyond seemed narrower, the shadows longer, twisting with intent. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was imagination, fear, fatigue. But the floorboards underfoot groaned in time with my heartbeat, and for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn the house itself had shifted. I moved toward the staircase, intent on leaving when I noticed the footprints again. Fainter now, leading to the front door. I exhaled, relief mingling with caution. Someone had been here recently, or perhaps it wasn't someone at all. The air felt heavier, oppressive, as though the house were weighing my thoughts, cataloging my fears, testing my resolve. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. A window on the far wall reflected my flashlight, and in that reflection, I thought I saw a figure, tall, thin, unmoving, standing just beyond the porch. I blinked. Nothing. Only fog curling outside. The same street I had driven on. Quiet, empty, yet the unease remained, pressing against me, whispering reminders that the house knew more than it should. I reached the front door. My hand shook as I fumbled with the knob. The whispers, soft, insistent, threaded around me, carrying fragments of memory and thought that weren't mine. They tugged at my mind, tugged at my certainty, tugged at the rational boundaries I clung to. I opened the door. The fog wrapped around me instantly, cold and damp. Elmwood Drive stretched empty, silent, impossibly still. No footprints, no lights, no signs of life. I exhaled, heavy, almost collapsing into the patrol car. I glanced back once. The house loomed behind me, silent, blank windows staring. Dust drifted from the open door like smoke. And yet I could feel it, watching, waiting, whispering, recording, patience infinite, intent deliberate. I climbed into the car, locking the doors, headlights cutting through the fog. Elmwood Drive stretched ahead, a quiet trap, a street that promised nothing and delivered more than I could comprehend. The house receded in the rearview mirror, yet I could feel its presence, persistent, deliberate. And then, as I started the engine, a single whisper followed me, drifting from the direction of the house, threading through the cabin, threading into my thoughts. Remember, you're not alone. I drove on, pulse pounding, hands tight on the wheel, ears straining for the impossible. The house was empty, yet the unease remained, because some emptiness is not nothing. Some silence is not silent. Elmwood Drive had shown me that tonight. I didn't just visit the house. I had walked inside its memory, its awareness, and it had walked inside me in return. Even as the fog swallowed the rearview mirror, even as the street faded behind me, I knew it would linger, not in walls, not in rooms, not in dust, but inside me, and no one lives here. But I do now carry it, every step, every thought, every breath. The first light of dawn felt wrong. not the pale orange of sunrise, soft and reassuring, but something harsher, colder, as if the day had begun without permission. I squinted at the spot where the house had been the night before. Elmwood Drive stretched out before me, fog lifting slowly from the asphalt, dew soaking the grass, birds beginning their hesitant songs. And yet there was nothing. No house, no porch, no crumbling walls, no chimney rising above the fog. Only empty street, wet and glistening, reflecting a sky that felt unnatural, too sharp in its clarity. I blinked. Sure, it was a trick of exhaustion. Patrols like this can warp perception, I told myself. I had been tense all night, chasing shadows, hearing whispers, seeing footprints that led nowhere. I had imagined things before, but the weight in my chest refused to lighten. Something was missing, something that should have been there, and now wasn't. My stomach knotted as I stepped closer, flashlight in hand, though its beam felt silly in the growing light. The ground was clear, empty, and yet the air carried the same oppressive presence from the night. I reached the spot where the front door had been, ran my hand over the dewy grass. Nothing. No footprints. No dirt disturbed. No lingering scent of wood smoke or decay. It was as if the house had never existed. And yet, the memories, the rooms, the dust, the whispers, they were fresh in my mind, vivid and undeniable. I could feel the nursery, see the crumpled papers, hear the faint, impossible voice whisper in my name. I stepped back, shaking my head, trying to ground myself. It had to be stress, fatigue, some trick of the night, but the unease didn't fade. It lingered, curling like smoke around my thoughts. I scanned the street. Mailboxes, empty driveways, fog clinging to the edges of trees. Elmwood Drive looked ordinary, quiet, harmless, and yet I knew better. The memory of the house sat heavy in my chest, pressing, as if refusing to be ignored. I walked down the street, hoping for some sign, some clue that would explain the impossibility. Nothing. Everything was pristine, as though the house had been erased, not destroyed, erased. The concrete sidewalk, the grass, the cracked asphalt, they showed no evidence of a structure ever having existed. No collapse, no remnants of bricks or wood, just emptiness. And that emptiness pressed against me harder than any wall could, a weight of absence I couldn't understand. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by the late shift, by exhaustion, by too many lonely nights patrolling the streets. Maybe Elmwood Drive had never held a house at all, and yet my memory refused to comply. I could still feel the walls, see the peeling wallpaper, smell the dust, the nursery, the whispering, the figure that had been waiting, just beyond the reach of light. Those weren't dreams, they were memories, or at least they felt that way. Too vivid, too precise. I reached the end of the street and turned back. Something in my chest twisted when I saw it again, or rather, didn't see it. The space where the house had been was now just a gap between two old oaks. Nothing more. My flashlight, which I kept raised, trembled in my hand, though I wasn't cold. My pulse hammered. The feeling of being watched, the oppressive, patient awareness, was gone, or perhaps it had never left me at all. I could still feel it, coiled in the shadows of my mind, unseen but undeniably present. I moved closer to the spot, almost stumbling over the wet curb, and I noticed it, a faint outline in the grass, a depression, subtle, almost imperceptible, shaped like a foundation. My chest tightened, my mind recoiled. It was enough to remind me that the house had existed, even if only briefly, as though reality had been bent around it and then returned to normal. And yet no one else could have seen it. No records, no neighbors, no cameras. It had vanished entirely. I knelt down, pressing a finger into the damp soil, feeling the faint impression of concrete beneath. My mind raced. How is this possible? Houses don't disappear. Structures don't vanish overnight, without explanation. Yet the evidence was there, whispering that what I had experienced was real. Even if it defied every law I knew, I could feel the dust on my hands, the splinters that had pricked my skin, the echoes of footsteps that had led me to nowhere. They were mine alone, and that isolation made the unease worse. I stood abruptly, scanning the foggy street, A crow cawed in the distance, its call sharp, accusing. The sun rose slowly, light spilling over the edges of the trees, but it did nothing to ease attention. I wanted to leave, wanted to convince myself that Elmwood Drive was now just another quiet street, harmless and empty, but I couldn't. The memory of the house was stitched into my mind, impossible to erase, like a scar no one else could see. I considered calling dispatch, explaining that I had been at a location that didn't exist. But what could I say? That a house had appeared overnight and vanished by morning? They would think I was joking. Or worse, they would think I was losing it. I pocketed the radio, trying to silence the questions, the doubt, the creeping terror that gnawed at me from the inside. I began to walk back toward my patrol car, boots squelching the damp grass, eyes darting to every shadow, every empty driveway. The street was empty, ordinary, silent, yet the sense of being watched lingered, a residue of presence that refused to leave. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, couldn't touch it, but I felt it in every nerve ending in the back of my neck, in the tightening of my chest. It was there, patient and knowing, waiting. As I approached my car, I glanced back one last time. Elmwood Drive stretched into the morning light, unremarkable, uninhabited. And yet I knew the truth. The house had been real. Its absence only proved it more. Reality had been around it, erased it from the world, but not from my mind. I felt the memory of those rooms, of the nursery, of the whispering voice threading to the walls, more acutely than ever. It was alive in my memory, in my fear, in the tight coil of unease that would not let go. I climbed into the car, doors locking automatically, heartbeat loud in the quiet morning. The patrol radio crackled once, static and empty, offering no comfort. Elmwood Drive lay behind me, empty, impossible, haunting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that the house had not vanished entirely. Its presence remained, stitched into the air, into the fog, into me. I could feel it in my chest, a lingering heartbeat that was not mine. The engine started with a soft hum. I drove away slowly, eyes fixed on a rearview mirror. Though the street behind me was empty, the sense of wrongness remained, pressing closer, persistent. The house was gone, yet it left something behind, a residue of fear, a thread of memory that would not fade, a reminder that some things do not follow the rules of reality. Elmwood Drive disappeared in the distance, swallowed by fog and morning light. And still, the weight of impossible settled over me. I could not shake it. I could not forget it. I had been inside a place that should not exist, seen things that should not be seen, and left with nothing tangible to show for it, except this, the dread, heavy and unyielding, now a part of me. And I knew, even as I drove, that Elmwood Drive would call to me again, that the house might return, or that I would return to it, pulled by the lingering presence that had chosen me. Because once you have walked inside a memory that bends reality, you cannot step away unmarked. And by dawn, the house was gone, but I had not left it behind. The radio crackled at exactly 2:03 a.m. Cutting to the quiet hum of my patrol car, a panicked voice spilled through, frantic and trembling, barely coherent over static. Someone screaming, "Please, I think they need help." The words came in jagged bursts, each syllable jagged, raw, soaked with fear. My hand tightened on the wheel, my chest tensed, that familiar coil of adrenaline sliding down my spine. I repeated the address back over the radio, trying to sound calm, professional. Elmwood Lane, number 32. Only, as I glanced at the GPS, the blinking that hovered over empty lots, shadows of buildings that weren't there. My stomach twisted. A mistake? Maybe. Some glitch in the system? The neighbor's panic sounded real. But the map said nothing existed. The street was silent when I arrived. A soft mist hovered low, curling around streetlights like smoke. The houses stood in perfect order, dark and still. I stepped out, boots crunching the gravel, flashlights sweeping the area. No lights on, no movement, no sign of anyone awake. Only the echo of the caller's voice, lingering in my head, scratching at my nerves. Then I heard it, soft at first, almost swallowed by the fog. A scream, short, sharp, piercing. It wasn't angry or distressed, It was something else. Empty, hollow, like a sound trapped between two realities. I froze, pulse hammering, scanning the rows of dark windows. Nothing. Only shadows stretching long, impossibly deep. My breath hitched. The scream wasn't human, and yet it had been. I followed the sound, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. Every step felt slower than the last, the fog thickening around my legs like it wanted to hold me in place. The scream came again, closer this time, but still distant, impossible. I spun around, expecting movement behind me. Nothing, only the street stretching into the black, silent and perfect. I checked the house numbers. 31, 33, 32. Nothing. The address existed only in the neighbor's fear, in the trembling voice that had called me. I knocked. No response. The door felt cold under my hand, as if the wood had absorbed all warmth in the world. A slight breeze whispered past my ear, more like a warning. I stepped back. Something was wrong. A faint rustle drew my attention to the side yard. I swept the flashlight beam over it, catching only shifting shadows among the hedges. Then a glimpse, white, fleeting, something moving too quickly for me to track. My heart thumped against my ribs. Could it be a person? An animal? But the street was empty. I shook my head. Stress, fatigue. I told myself the usual stories. Late night calls played tricks on the mind, but my gut refused the excuse. Something was there. Something watching. I tried calling the neighbor back. The radio squawked in static. A harsh, hissing interruption. No answer. Only the faint echo of my own voice, bouncing back at me, distorted, unfamiliar. A cold shiver ran through my spine. I scanned the area again. The streetlights flickered one after another, and I blinked at the nearest house. Something moved in the corner of my eye. Gone when I looked directly. I edged closer to the front of the house. The yard was empty, unremarkable, almost ordinary, yet the hair on my arms bristled. I could feel it before I saw it. A presence subtle, patient, just beyond the reach of my vision. My fingers tightened around my flashlight like a lifeline, my ears straining for any sound, for any sign that I wasn't alone. And then it came, a whisper, soft, almost drowned by the wind, but unmistakable. My name, whispered, drawn out, deliberate. I spun around. No one, just a fog, curling around trees and fences, a living thing. My pulse raced. I checked my radio again. Still dead, only static. Panic prickled at my skin. I wanted to run, to drive away, to tell myself this was nothing. But curiosity, that relentless, foolish curiosity, pushed me forward. I couldn't leave it like this. Not when someone somewhere had screamed for help. The scream came again, different this time. Closer, but not in the house. Behind me? Around me? I couldn't tell. It bounced off the walls of my mind, off the empty street, echoing and untraceable. I turned slowly, flashlight sweeping the mist. Shadows twisted in impossible ways, lines bending, shapes bending. Everything familiar suddenly alien. My stomach churned. The scream had been real, and it was still here, waiting. I took a step toward the yard again, and then froze. The grass, previously wet and soft under my boots, seemed to pulse slightly, like something just beneath the surface breathing. My heart jumped. No logical explanation. I knelt, flashlight trained on the ground. Nothing visible, yet the sensation remained, vibrating through my fingers, my chest. Something alive, something aware. Another whisper, this one closer. Inside my head. Why? It asked. Just that. Soft, deliberate, impossible. I shook my head, trying to dispel it, but it lingered. My breath hitched. My flashlight flickered. I could feel the air thicken, pressing in from all sides. Elmwood Lane, once just a routine patrol, now felt like a threshold into something I wasn't meant to see. I thought of the neighbor. Could they still be in danger? Were they even awake? Did anyone else hear what I did? The radio remained silent. The street empty. The house at 32 vanished. I rubbed my eyes. A trick of fatigue. It had to be. But the memory of the scream, of the whisper, of the movement just beyond perception, it was indelible. I moved forward, Finally, careful, deliberate. Flashlight beams sweeping over every bush, every shadow, every corner of the yard. Nothing. The streetlights flickered again, and I caught it, an outline. White, fleeting, impossible. It was there just for a heartbeat and gone before I could focus. My pulse accelerated, fear tangled with fascination. What had I seen? What had I heard? I checked the neighboring houses. All dark, all silent. The sense of being watched intensified. Not just in the yard, not just in the street, but everywhere. Elmwood Lane had become alive with the impossible, a place where reality bent just enough to leave me questioning myself. I wanted to call it in to report something, but what could I say? A house that isn't there screamed at me? It would sound insane, and yet I knew the truth, undeniable and unwelcome, etched into my senses. Another sound, faint this time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, behind me, but when I turned, no one, just the mist curling at my ankles. My stomach twisted. I felt it, eyes on me, not human, not visible, just awareness. It was patient, waiting, judging. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. I backed toward my car, keeping my flashlight trained on the yard. The fog seemed to thicken, shifting, curling around shapes that shouldn't exist. And then silence, a pause so complete, so absolute, it pressed into my ears, making them ring. No footsteps, no whispers, only the hum of the engine and my own uneven breathing. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself. Yet I knew it hadn't ended. It would return, or I would return to it. Something had been awakened or noticed me, and that awareness lingered, patient and unyielding. I climbed into the patrol car, doors locking with a soft click. Radio static filled the silence. Elmwood Lane stretched behind me, empty and ordinary once again, yet nothing felt normal. The scream, the whisper, the outline in the yard, all burned into my memory. I started the engine, hands trembling, eyes on the rear-view mirror. Empty street, yet the sense of being watched followed me like a shadow, settling over my chest, a weight I couldn't shake. I drove slowly, headlights slicing through the mist, every sense alert. Elmwood Lane receded into the distance, but the unease didn't fade. I could feel it in my bones, in my heartbeat, in the twitch of my fingers around the wheel. The night had shifted. Something had brushed against reality, and I had seen it, or heard it, or both. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't forget. I might never return to Elmwood Lane, but it had marked me. By the time I reached the next street, the fog had lifted slightly. The panic ebbed, replaced by something more subtle, a gnawing certainty that I hadn't imagined anything. The radio remained dead, the neighbor unreachable, and the night was silent again. But the memory of that scream, that whisper, the fleeting shape in the yard, it would not leave. Even now, hours later, sitting at my desk, coffee cooling beside me, I can feel it. Elmwood Lane is not empty. Elmwood Lane is watching, and the scream, impossible as it was, lingers, echoing in the corners of my mind. Waiting. The streetlights flickered as I drove deeper into the neighborhood. The patrol car humming low, engine straining against the chill that had settled over the asphalt. Elmwood Lane stretched ahead, empty, unnervingly still. My headlights sliced through the mist, revealing nothing but dark houses and the occasional crooked tree. No movement, no glow from windows, just a long, thin fog curling around the sidewalks like smoke from a dying fire. I parked in the center of the street, radio dead, the static still lingering like a warning. The address had vanished from GPS, but something told me I wasn't imagining the call. Footsteps on the gravel outside my car made me freeze. My flashlight hovered over the yard across the street. Nothing, just shadows stretching long under the yellow glow. But the sound had been there, soft, deliberate, following a rhythm I couldn't place. I stepped out, boots crunching, and the fog wrapped around me, cold and damp. I scanned the ground, flashlight slicing through the mist. Footprints, small, scuffed, wet, fresh, leading away from the curb and into the heart of the street. My pulse quickened. They ended abruptly, halfway across the pavement, as though the ground had swallowed them whole. I leaned closer, Knuckles white on the flashlight, heart hammering against ribs that felt too tight. No explanation. Only the fog. Only silence. I followed the path cautiously. Each step echoed, swallowed immediately by the stillness around me. Houses loomed dark and empty, their windows like eyes that refused to blink. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and something else, metal, faint but unmistakable. I swallowed hard, throat dry, ears straining for even the tiniest hint of life. Nothing, yet I could feel it, watching, waiting. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. Another set of footsteps, light, hurried, whispered against the asphalt. Behind me, ahead, I swung the flashlight and the slow arc shadows twisted unnaturally. Corners of the street folding in ways that shouldn't be possible. Then, a glimpse, a figure, just on the edge of visibility. Gone before I could focus. My chest tightened. The fog seemed to shift in response, curling like fingers over the road, hiding whatever had moved. I checked the neighboring houses, one by one, all empty, doors locked, windows unbroken, lawns untouched. The sense of emptiness pressed down on me. Elmwood Lane wasn't just silent. It was erased, paused, held in some impossible state. Footprints appeared again, this time faintly leading toward the abandoned lot at the end of the street. I followed, every muscle tense, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The lot was wide and bare, gravel crunching under my boots. More footprints. They led to the center, then vanished. I crouched, scanning the ground. The dirt was undisturbed, no sign that anything had ever been there. I straightened slowly, breathing shallow, every nerve screaming. Something wasn't just missing. It had never existed here. Or maybe it had, and I was the first to notice its absence. A sound, a whisper, low and deliberate, drifted from nowhere I could locate. My name, drawn out, soft, mocking. I spun, flashlight slicing across the lot, across the street. Nothing, only the fog curling like smoke, thickening now, almost alive. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. I wanted to run, to leave, but the footprints, they demanded attention. They were a path, a lure, and I was already caught. I followed the trail toward the old community park at the end of the lane. Swings hung motionless, chains creaking softly in the slight breeze. The fog hugged the ground, weaving through the monkey bars, around the slide, around the empty benches. Footprints crossed the asphalt pads again, but again vanished mid-step. I leaned down, flashlight on the pavement, every sense screaming at me that this was wrong. The prints weren't just disappearing. They were evaporating, dissolving like dust caught in sunlight. I stopped near the swings. My reflection in the puddle of rainwater trembled unnaturally, distorted, elongating before snapping back to normal. Something brushed against my shoulder. I spun violently, flashlight cutting across the park. Nothing. My pulse roared in my ears. The whisper came again, just behind me, closer, distinct. "Why?" it asked. Only that. My own voice trembled in response. I swallowed hard, tried to ground myself in logic, in reality. There was none. I followed the faint traces toward the basketball court at the far end of the park. Broken hoops leaned like twisted skeletons. Footprints appeared along the cracked asphalt, then disappeared again. I bent down, fingertips tracing the wet indentations. Cold, damp, almost alive under my touch. My stomach coiled tight. Every instinct urged retreat. But something deeper pushed forward. A need to see, to understand, to know what had left these impossible marks. The fog thickened, swirling around my legs now, tugging at me. I spun, flashlight beam slicing through the mist. Another shadow flickered. Human-shaped, taller than me, long limbs, vanishing before I could focus. I backed up. My boot slipped slightly in the gravel. Heart racing. The fog wasn't just around me now. It moved with me like it was breathing. Whispered fragments, unintelligible, drifted through my ears. Not my imagination. It wasn't imagination. I tried calling it in over the radio. Nothing. Only static, hissing like wind over wires. The street beyond the park stretched empty, unnervingly straight. A corridor of mist and shadow. And then, from behind, a footstep. Single, deliberate. I froze, trying to locate it. My flashlight traced the edge of the fog. Nothing. Yet I knew something had just stepped there. The footprints appeared again, this time leading to the edge of the forest behind the park. I hesitated. Trees loomed black, skeletal, their branches scratching against the fog like fingers reaching for me. I could see the faint imprint of the path, disappearing between the roots, the earth disturbed. Another whisper. My name, closer, sharper. I swallowed, moving forward slowly, flashlight beam quivering over tree trunks. Every shadow seemed to have a life of its own, moving, watching, aware. I reached the first row of trees. Footprints vanished entirely. Only the disturbed leaves and soil marked the path. Then nothing. No trail, no sign, just empty darkness. My pulse spiked. I could feel eyes on me from all directions. Not human, not visible, just awareness, patient and waiting. The whisper returned, drawn out, insistent. Why are you here? My mouth went dry. I wanted to answer. I wanted to flee. I wanted to be anywhere else. Yet I stayed, rooted, drawn into the impossible. I stumbled backward, breaking line of sight, flashlight shaking violently. The fog thickened, curling over the ground like living smoke. Then silence, absolute, deafening. The forest and park seemed paused, waiting. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm the chaos in my mind. Footprints, whispering, shadows. Had I imagined it? No, impossible. My boots bore witness to the vanished prints, and my ears to the whispers that still lingered. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint smell of damp soil, metal, and something else. Faintly sweet, almost decaying. I swallowed hard. The path back to the street seemed longer than I remembered, distorted by the fog. Shadows stretched impossibly, and somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of footsteps continued, untraceable. My instinct screamed to leave, but every nerve was fixed on the empty street, the impossible prints, the vanished shapes. I finally made it back to the car, doors locking with a soft click. The radio remained dead. Elmwood Lane behind me stretched silent and empty. The park, the forest, the vanished footprints. They were there, and yet they weren't. The fog hung in the corners of my vision, subtle, patient. I could feel it following, waiting for me to look back, to falter. As I drove away, the mist rolled over the street like a living thing, swallowing footprints, erasing traces. Elmwood Lane remained empty, silent, yet marked by what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had touched. Footprints that vanished, whispers in the fog, shadows that moved just beyond perception. The street was empty, yes, but it had eyes. It had memory. It had intent. Even now, hours later, sitting behind my desk, I can still feel it. The prints, the whispers, the absence that feels alive. Elmwood Lane isn't just a street. It's a place that watches, that erases, that waits. And I, foolishly, recklessly, walked its path. The radio crackled, a low, insistent static that made my teeth ache. I adjusted the dial, twisting knobs like it would help, like it would make sense of nonsense. Elmwood Lane had fallen behind me, swallowed in fog and night, yet the unease clung heavy, like wet cloth draped over shoulders. Then it came a voice, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. My name, whispered, low, sibilant, threading through the static like a needle through skin. I froze, hand on the microphone. Who's there? My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the car in the night. The radio responded with a hiss, then a pause, then my name again, repeated slowly, almost contemplatively, like someone tracing the letters with a finger. My pulse spiked. The line had been dead. Officially, the network showed nothing. No connection, no transmission. And yet it spoke to me. I looked around. Streetlights flickered ahead, half dead, cast in the fog in shifting pools of gray. My reflection in the dashboard's glass looked wrong. Shadows behind my eyes lingered too long, stretching across my face. The voice whispered again, closer, yet nowhere. I shivered, cold, unnatural, crawling over my spine. I adjusted the radio, fiddled with the knobs, hoping for clarity. Clarity never came. Only my name, over and over. Patient, expectant. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching on damp gravel, flashlight swinging in an unsteady arc. The mist clung to my legs, wrapping tight, almost resisting movement. This isn't real, I muttered, but the whisper answered, still low, still intimate. My name, my own voice trembled in response. Small, fragile. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave Elmwood Lane forever. But something, some stubborn, impossible curiosity, held me there. The houses were dark, empty, dead. Windows like unblinking eyes. And yet, I felt watched. I always felt watched, ever since those first vanished footprints. My flashlight illuminated dust on the lawns, broken fences, signs peeling from their posts. A cold breeze rose, carrying the faint metallic smell again. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself. The whisper came again. My name, one syllable at a time. Closer. Behind me? Ahead? I couldn't tell. I checked the car. Engine still running. Radio still dead. My reflection in the windshield shimmered as though the glass had liquid beneath it. And then, I swear it, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye, tall, elongated, vanishing when I turned. My hands gripped the flashlight, knuckles white. My mind raced. Elmwood Lane shouldn't exist like this, shouldn't behave like this. Yet here I was, alone, and not alone at once. I raised the radio again. A burst of static, then silence. My name whispered, trailing off like smoke. I walked, step by step, following instinct, following fear. The fog shifted, wrapping around the asphalt, curling over patches of dirt and weeds. Footprints, fresh, leading nowhere. They ended abruptly near the old street lamp at the curve. I crouched, tracing the shallow impressions, damp and cold. Each fingertip pressed against them, and a shiver ran through my arm. It wasn't just footprints. It was a message, something deliberate, meant for me. Another whisper, closer now, from inside the car. My heart jumped. I spun, flashlight slicing through fog, revealing only the empty street. But the whisper persisted, circling, echoing, layering itself over the static in my mind. My name, my name, my name. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. Something outside, something unseen, was waiting, patient, intent, watching. I moved cautiously down the lane, eyes straining through the mist. Every detail seemed alive. Leaves clung to boots. A shattered mailbox swayed slightly, though no breeze touched it. I could feel the hum of the radio static in my teeth, vibrating to the car doors, through the soles of my boots. Another whisper, this time from above trees or the shadows themselves. The fog shifted again, folding unnaturally over the sidewalk, and I stepped back, breath caught in my throat. I reached the intersection where Elmwood Lane bent sharply. A single streetlight flickered, revealing another set of footprints, small, scuffed, vanishing mid-path. I traced them with my flashlight, disbelief tightening around my ribcage. This wasn't possible. No one lived here. No one. And yet, something had walked this street tonight. Something that didn't want to be seen, yet wanted to be followed. The radio hissed, louder now, as though responding to my fear. My name again, but this time drawn out, elongated, a thread of sound weaving through the static. I raised the microphone, pressed it to my lips. Stop. Whoever you are, nothing, only static. And then, softer, intimate, whispered, my own voice distorted, repeating my words. My stomach knotted. My mind raced. I knew, somehow, I wasn't alone. Not in the way the world allows. A movement at the edge of my vision. Something crouched. Something tall. Too dark to be human. It dissolved into fog the instant I blinked. My flashlight trembled in my grip. My heart hammered. Elmwood Lane had a rhythm now. Footsteps, static, whispers, all entwined. A pattern I couldn't untangle. And yet, it drew me forward, down toward the abandoned lot at the lane's end. I followed, boots crunching, flashlight beams slicing through shadows. The lot stretched wide and barren. Gravel shifted underfoot, disturbed by nothing I could see. Footprints appeared again, leading to the center, vanishing like dust and wind. I leaned down, fingertips brushing the ground. Cold, wet, my name whispered again, right beside me, though nothing was there. My own reflection shimmered in a puddle, twisted, unnatural, lips moving before mine. I swallowed hard. Something was mimicking me, anticipating me, waiting for my reaction. I stepped back. The radio hissed violently, static shredding my ears. A whisper overlaid the noise, fragmented, layered. My name, then laughter? No, not laughter. A sigh. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, wrapping tighter, pushing me toward the street. Elmwood Lane had become a corridor of sound and absence, shadows folding over themselves, waiting for me to falter. I ran, just a few steps, heart thrumming in panic. Footprints appeared in front of me, then vanished again. I pressed forward, flashlight shaking, radio alive with static and whispers. I reached the curve where the street bent into the forest. The fog was thick now, almost solid, moving around me like liquid. My own name echoed endlessly, overlapping, multiple voices, multiple whispers. My chest ached, every breath shallow and rapid. I dared to glance back. The street stretched empty, yet the fog pulsed, folding, shifting. Shadows moved, impossible angles, stretching toward me, recoiling when I looked directly. Another whisper. You shouldn't be here. Not my name this time. Something else. Alien. Patient. I swallowed hard, shaking. Elmwood Lane had become alive, aware. It watched, it tested, it waited. I stumbled toward the forest's edge, the fog swirling, whispering, shadows converging. Footprints disappeared completely, leaving only the disturbed earth, the sense of a presence just beyond perception. I pressed the radio to my ear, static shredding. Then silence. A single word drifted through, soft, intimate, drawn from the fog itself. My name. And I realized fully that Elmwood Lane wasn't a street. It was a living trap. It measured, mirrored, responded. It knew me, every step, every breath, every instinct. I wanted to flee. I wanted to leave it all behind. But curiosity, foolish and relentless, rooted me in place. The whispers circled, static crackling over the dead channel, all of it weaving a web around me. I was caught, watched, measured, and the street waited, patient, eternal. I finally turned toward my car. The fog clung, alive, resisting. My reflection in the windshield shimmered again, wrong, stretching, elongated. The radio crackled one last time. My name, slow, soft, expectant, a promise or a warning. I didn't know. I slammed the door, locked it, and drove away. Tires crunching over gravel, radio dead again. Elmwood Lane disappeared behind the fog, silent, empty, yet aware. My name lingered in my chest, in my mind, in the static that would not let me go. Even now, hours later, the whispering hasn't left. The radio remains dead, but I hear it anyway. Soft, patient, calling. My name. Elmwood Lane isn't a street. It's a presence, a voice. And I walked its path. Foolishly, willingly, forever haunted by what followed me through the static. The gates groaned before I even reached them. I froze at the edge of the cemetery road, flashlight trembling in my hand. No wind, no movement, just the metal screaming against its hinges, slow, deliberate, like it remembered me before I even existed. I tried to tell myself it was old, rusted, nothing more, but the sound lingered in my chest, vibrating against bone, resonating with something deep and wrong. I stepped closer. Gravel crunched under my boots, a sharp contrast to the muffled silence beyond the gates. Tombstones loomed like dark teeth, sharp and jagged, haphazard in the fog. Shadows clung to corners I couldn't reach with my light, folding over themselves. And still, the gates creaked again, answering me or calling me. Though no one else was there, I swung the flashlight across the cemetery. Names etched in stone stared back, some faded, some freshly carved, though I knew no one had been here for years. A shiver ran down my spine. My first patrol, first night alone, and the air already felt heavy, almost thick enough to push against. I swallowed, trying to anchor myself to reason. Creaking metal was nothing, dust and old hinges. Yet every nerve screamed differently. I moved past the gates, each step deliberate. Fog rolled over my boots like liquid, curling up my legs, cold and damp. The flashlight's beam danced over stones, illuminating small details. A cracked angel, a chipped cross, a hollow-eyed cherub that seemed to watch me. The deeper I walked, the more the cemetery expanded, stretching farther than the maps suggested, twisting, elongating unnaturally. My stomach churned. How could a place so small on paper feel endless at night? Another creak, soft this time, almost a whisper. My hand froze on the flashlight. The gates, swinging ever so slightly, though the air remained still. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I told myself to breathe, to focus, but every exhale came as a mist of doubt. Footstep behind me? No, just gravel, settling. Yet, when I glanced back, the gate stood still. Empty, silent, but I could still feel them, the presence of their complaint, lingering in the air like a threat. I continued, the fog thickening, swallowing the edges of the path. Stones became more irregular, some sunk, some jutted out, almost deliberately placed to trip the unwary. I bent over a cracked stone, brushing dirt away with gloved fingers. A name, long forgotten, weathered, stared back at me. I shivered. How many had walked here before? How many had vanished without trace? My own patrol seemed insignificant. Yet somehow I felt like prey in a place that had learned to wait. A low wind whispered through branches, though still the air remained motionless. Something rustled in the distance. A rodent? A bird? Maybe, but the sound lingered, prolonged unnaturally, dragging, as though listening to me, following. I swung my flashlight toward it. Empty shadows, stretching between stones like fingers reaching for warmth. The creak of the gates echoed again, louder now, closer, though I had moved 50 meters in. I stopped, heart hammering. My own reflection in the beam seemed wrong, stretched in the fog. I followed the main path toward the center, where the oldest graves were clustered. Here the fog thinned slightly, revealing statues with hollow eyes, mouths frozen in silent screams. My flashlight swept over them, over the names that repeated like a chant in my mind. And then I noticed it. Footprints, not mine, faint impressions in the dew-damp earth, leading between the graves. They were too small, delicate, precise. Someone or something had been here, watching me, waiting. I bent closer. The footprints ended abruptly near a cracked mausoleum, stone doors slightly ajar. I cursed under my breath, imagining the reports later. First night, already tripping over nothing. I muttered, but the hairs on my neck rose as a low groan sounded inside the structure. Not metal, not wind. Something deep, resonant, echoing through stone. My mind scrambled for logic. Oh, with settling? Maybe. Or maybe the cemetery was alive in ways I wasn't ready to see. I pressed forward, flashlight sweeping, breath shallow. The mausoleum door shifted, just a hair's width, though I had left it alone. I heard whispers, not human words, not intelligible, but a sibilant, soft murmur that tickled my ears, curling into fog around me. My pulse spiked. I shook my head. It's the wind, I whispered to myself. Yet the air remained still, and the door moved again. I stepped back, hand resting on the cold stone. Fog pressed closer, unnaturally tight, almost solid. I imagined shapes moving just beyond the light, dark shadows bending impossibly. My flashlight flickered. I cursed, tapping it. The beam steadied. Footsteps, mine? No, lighter, more deliberate, pacing between the graves. I turned, sweeping the light. Nothing, yet the pressure in my chest grew, and the whispers followed me, not from any one direction, but everywhere at once. I reached a broken archway leading to an older section, where stones leaned like broken teeth, and dirt paths vanished into shadow. The fog here was thick, almost tactile, brushing my face, swirling around the flashlight's glow. I paused. The gates behind me creaked again, slow and insistent, though I was 50 meters in. Someone or something was marking my path, reminding me the cemetery knew I was here. My heartbeat thundered. Every instinct screamed to turn. Yet I stepped forward. Curiosity mingled with dread. The footprints resumed. Tiny, delicate, leading deeper. I followed, trying to convince myself I was tracking an animal astray. But the prints were too neat, too deliberate. They curved around gravestones, vanished into thin air, reappeared 20 meters ahead. Each time I bent to inspect them, the whispering grew, layering, overlapping, echoing off stone walls in impossible directions. My name? No, not yet. Something older, something patient. A broken fence rattled in the distance, though still no wind. My flashlight flickered again, briefly revealing a figure, or maybe just a shadow between the tombstones. I blinked. Nothing. My reflection in the fogged-up glass of a tomb's recess looked wrong, elongated. The gates groaned one last time before silence. The static weight of the cemetery pressed down on me. I wanted to run, yet curiosity rooted me in place. I crouched near a toppled statue. Its stone eyes seemed to follow, though I knew it was impossible. The fog shifted, thickened, curling around my boots like fingers. A whisper floated directly behind my ear, unintelligible but intimate, urgent. I froze. My breath caught. My pulse raced. And then silence. Absolute suffocating. I exhaled slowly, trying to convince myself I imagined it. The gates stood still this time, but the memory of their sound lingered, echoing inside my skull. I stood, shaking, scanning the area. Nothing moved, yet I could feel it watching, patient, deliberate. The night seemed endless, stretching the path in impossible ways. Every shadow hinted at life. Every whisper promised presence. I realized then that the cemetery wasn't just a place. It was an entity, attentive, waiting. It measured every step, every breath, every thought. My patrol had begun, and already I felt less like a guard and more like prey. I decided to finish the first round quickly, forcing steps that felt heavy and deliberate. The fog swirled around my legs. The whispers quieted, but the pressure remained. The gates loomed behind me, silent now yet threatening. I glanced back one last time. They stood tall, immovable, but I could still sense them. Rusted metal, patient and alive, listening, watching, remembering. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight, and continued my patrol, each step in negotiation with fear itself, knowing that the night had only just begun. The cemetery exhaled with me, the fog curling back to settle in corners around stones against walls. The gates no longer moved, but the memory of their voice, metal against metal, lingered. Something had followed me from the edge of the path into the deeper shadows. Yet I couldn't see it, not yet, but I knew with certainty that it would. And the whispers, patient, layered, soft, would not let me forget. I completed the circuit, boots crunching over gravel, heart still hammering. The fog began to thin, the distant trees blurred against the horizon, but the weight, the pressure, remained. Elmwood Lane hadn't been this alive yet. The cemetery, this old ground, it breathed, it waited, it observed. I left the gates behind, still creaking in memory, and knew my first night was only an introduction. There were stories here I was not meant to know, and yet somehow I had already begun to listen. I returned the next morning, still feeling the weight of the cemetery's gaze. The gates were silent this time, though I half expected them to groan, to protest my approach. Fog lingered low across the graves, thin but stubborn, curling over headstones and paths. The smell of damp earth hung heavier than usual, and when my boots touched the soil near the oldest plots, it felt different. Soft, freshly turned. I froze before the first row. New mounds, perfectly formed, neat as if someone had spent hours digging, yet no tools lay around, no workers. The morning mist clung to each heap like a veil. I knelt by the closest one, fingertips brushing loose soil. It collapsed slightly, fine and damp, smelling of raw earth. My chest tightened. Who could have dug these graves in the dead of night? And more importantly, why? I stepped back and looked around. Nothing. The cemetery was still, silent except for the distant rustle of wind through the treetops. Yet the footprints were fresh, scattered around the new dirt, sometimes human, sometimes not. They twisted oddly, curved unnaturally between graves, stopping abruptly, vanishing mid-step. I bent to examine one, following it with my finger, cold, smooth, like someone had walked right out of the world entirely. My flashlight still hung from last night's patrol. I flicked it on, scanning the area. The fog caught the beam, glowing faintly, and I caught movement, shadows, just at the edge of visibility. Something shifting behind the newly dug graves. I spun toward it, but there was nothing, only the mounds, orderly, unnervingly precise. I could feel eyes in the fog, though I couldn't see them, and the earth beneath my boots hummed slightly, a subtle vibration, like the cemetery had stirred awake while I slept. I circled the graves. Names on the older stones stared blankly, weathered and gray. No names on the new ones. No markers. Nothing to indicate who or what would go in them. I sank to one knee, running a gloved hand along the side of a mound. Moist, soft, disturbingly warm. My stomach flipped. I shook my head, tried to convince myself it was imagination, a hangover from the gates, the shadows, the fog. But the dirt itself seemed to pulse under my touch. I moved back toward the path. Footprints followed, just behind me, though I hadn't noticed anyone walking. Human boots, small and careful. I stopped, heart hammering. They ended abruptly at a patch of bare soil. No more footprints, only the mounds and the fog curling higher, shifting with something unseen. The air grew colder, tighter, as if the cemetery was holding its breath. I wanted to leave, to run, but curiosity kept me rooted. One mound, at the far edge, looked different. The soil was darker, richer, almost black. I knelt beside it, brushing the loose earth. Something struck me, an indentation, like a handprint pressed into the soil. I froze, staring. Who, or what, could have pressed their hand there after digging? My mind spun. I stood slowly, scanning the mist. Every shadow between the stones felt alive, bending just beyond reach. And then I saw it, a faint shimmer, like heat rising from the dirt, moving slightly, curling. Not wind, not fog, something else. Watching, waiting. I stepped closer to the mound. My flashlight beam trembled across the ground. The shimmer pulsed, faint and slow, like a heartbeat buried in the soil. My pulse caught. I bent down, reaching toward it. The moment my fingers brushed the dirt, the shimmer vanished. A whisper, soft but unmistakable, tickled my ear. Do you see us? I spun. Fog and mist. Nothing. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight tighter. The cemetery was speaking. Or at least, it wanted me to think it was. I moved between the mounds, counting them silently. 1, 2, 3, more than I had noticed before, though I was sure I had walked this path yesterday. A sense of rawness crawled along my spine. The order, the spacing, the perfection of the graves. It wasn't random. Someone had planned it meticulously. Or something. My flashlight flickered again, and I saw movement. Shadows bending unnaturally between the mounds, curving around stones I hadn't noticed before. I blinked. Gone. Only the mounds remained. I stepped toward the center of the cemetery, where the oldest crypts leaned in on each other. The fog thickened, curling like smoke around my boots. Each mound seemed to grow taller as I approached, though I knew it was impossible. My mind played tricks, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Footsteps again, delicate, pacing near the new graves. I followed, cautious. The prints ended abruptly, yet the whispers returned, softer this time, overlapping, layering. I couldn't make out words, but I felt them. Impatient, deliberate, patient. They were everywhere, and nowhere. I crouched near a freshly dug edge. The soil collapsed under my fingers. Cold, damp. Something moved beneath it, or maybe it moved the air around it, sending a ripple through the mound. I recoiled. My flashlight beam trembled across the fog. Shadows leaned toward me, bending over stones, stretching longer than physics allowed. I told myself to breathe. It's just dirt, just fog, just imagination. But the cemetery had begun to weigh on me, pressing from all sides, and every breath felt like inhaling someone else's presence. A new mound appeared, though I hadn't moved. I froze. 1, 2, 3, for there were now 7, 8, I didn't see them being made. No digging sounds. No tools. Just more dirt. My pulse skyrocketed. Something, or someone, was making graves while I watched. And when I blinked, one of the mounds shifted slightly, as if settling into place, though the soil was untouched. My hand shook as I reached out. A whisper, again urgent, closer. I stepped back, tripping over the edge of a fallen stone. Gravel scattered. Shadows flinched, melting into the fog. My flashlight flickered. Something flashed just behind the beam. A shape, small, crouched, vanishing before I could see it fully. I felt it in my chest, a chill crawling up my spine. Not human, not entirely. Watching, measuring, waiting. The path out seemed farther than I remembered. Mounds multiplied along the way, curving, twisting toward me as I walked. I counted them again. None had names. None had markers. And yet, somehow they felt personal, like someone or something was writing messages in the dirt, communicating in the only way it could. My heart pounded. Footsteps followed again, silent but deliberate. I glanced back. Nothing. The mounds were still, but the air trembled. I approached the largest mound, at the center of the newer plots. The soil was rich, dark, nearly black. My hands hovered above it, hesitant. Another whisper, louder this time, curling around me. Touch. My skin prickled. I pressed my fingers into the dirt. Cold, smooth, alive. The mound shivered beneath my touch, subtle but undeniable. I yanked my hand back, stumbling. The fog thickened around the mound, curling up, hiding it from the rest of the cemetery. Something moved beneath. I was sure of it. Breathing? Waiting? I didn't know. The rest of the new grave seemed to lean slightly toward me, as if acknowledging my presence. Shadows twisted between the stones, stretching impossibly, folding over themselves. Every whisper layered into another, soft, insistent, pressing into my ears, my skull. I felt dizzy, nauseous. The cemetery was alive in a way I hadn't understood before. Each mound, each footprint, each whisper was deliberate, a message, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. I stumbled back toward the main path, eyes scanning constantly. The fog swirled, forming shapes that weren't there when I blinked. Footprints continued to follow, stopping, vanishing, appearing again. Each mound I passed seemed to grow, subtly and possibly. The air pressed closer, tighter, a subtle vibration that made my teeth rattle. My flashlight flickered one final time, revealing the largest mound in full, a small handprint embedded in the topsoil. Fresh, waiting. I swallowed hard, stepping back. The whispers faded slightly as I left the area, but the weight remained. The mounds multiplied behind me in the mist, each one perfect, empty, yet somehow charged with purpose. I felt the cemetery's patience, its watchfulness. The gates remained silent now, the fog lifting. Yet I knew what happened here overnight was only the beginning. Something had moved while the world slept, and it had been waiting for me. I left the cemetery, boots crunching on gravel, heart racing, hands shaking. The morning sun was faint, barely cutting through the fog. The gates loomed behind me, silent, yet alive in memory. I could feel the dirt mound's presence lingering in my chest, like echoes of breath, like something that had imprinted itself on me. I knew I would return, not because I wanted to, but because it had called me, and next time I would see more. I moved deeper into the cemetery, boots crunching over frost-hardened soil. The fog had thickened overnight, hugging the tombstones like a living thing, curling between the cracks in the slabs. Each breath I drew came out in white clouds, and every exhale sounded too loud, echoing off stones that had witnessed decades of silence. The new graves I had seen yesterday sat in rows, blank, perfect, and silently accusing. I couldn't stop thinking about them. The way the earth seemed almost conscious. Footsteps. I froze. Sharp, deliberate, but faint, almost like a whisper against the ground. Behind me, I spun. Flashlight beam cutting through the fog, but the path was empty. Nothing moved. I told myself it was the wind, settling against the stones. But the crunching continued, irregular, circling, disappearing, returning. I clenched my jaw. Someone or something was out here with me, but I couldn't see it. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, long and thin, bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. I followed the sound, stepping cautiously between the rows of tombstones. Each one loomed like a sentinel, cracked faces and moss-streaked names watching me pass. The footprints I had noted before reappeared, faint in the damp soil, zigzagging between graves. Human at first glance, but the angles were wrong. Too narrow, too sharp. They ended abruptly mid-step, as if whoever or whatever had been walking had simply vanished. A sudden rustle behind a stone made me jump. My flashlight swung, illuminating nothing, only fog curling and twisting around a headstone. I squinted, my pulse hammering. Was I imagining shapes? Or were the shadows moving independently, drifting across the mounds and stones, aware of me? I took a slow breath and stepped closer to a row of older graves. The footprints continued between them, ending at an ancient stone whose inscription had long since faded. No footprints beyond it, yet the air shifted, warmer, denser, as if something crouched just out of reach. I bent, running a gloved hand over the frozen soil. It shivered beneath my fingers, subtle but undeniable. A whisper brushed my ear, soft, urgent, almost pleading, "Don't look." I spun, flashlight swinging wildly. Fog, only fog. The footprints were gone now, replaced by faint indentations, almost like small hands pressed into the dirt. My stomach churned. Someone or something had been here, watching me the entire time, unseen yet deliberate. I continued forward, keeping my light fixed on the path. The shadows followed, always just beyond visibility, flicking between stones like fragmented pieces of darkness. Every step felt heavier. The fog thickened, clinging to my clothes and skin. A shape moved behind a tombstone. I was sure of it, yet when I approached, it melted into nothing. I could feel it, close, pressing at the edges of my senses. Footsteps mirrored mine now, slow, cautious, echoing my rhythm. But when I glanced behind, there was only emptiness and mist. I reached the row where the newest graves lay. Fresh soil, still dark, still slightly warm. The footprints ended abruptly at the center of the row. My flashlight swept over the mounds. One of them shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. I bent to examine it. The dirt gave slightly under my touch, then settled again. A whisper curled around my ears, cold and insistent. "We're here." I froze. My hands trembled, but I couldn't pull away. The soil felt alive, breathing, as if the earth itself were aware I was intruding. Then I heard it, a faint, scraping sound behind the stones. Not footsteps, something dragging. I spun toward it. A shadow flitted between two tombstones, moving impossibly fast, slender and dark, almost smoke-like. I raised my flashlight. Nothing, only fog twisting where the shadow had been. My pulse rattled in my ears. The scraping continued, faint but deliberate, circling me now. I wanted to run, but my boots felt glued to the frost-hardened earth. The cemetery wasn't just silent. It was watching, breathing, waiting. I tried to move, to step back. The fog thickened instantly, wrapping around me like a blanket of ice. Shapes shifted in every direction. Shadows flitting between tombstones, impossibly fast. I could sense a presence behind each stone, crouched low, observing. I shone my flashlight into one cluster of shadows. Nothing, yet the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Footsteps pressed closer, circling my own, never touching the earth yet echoing clearly in my mind. One of the oldest tombstones leaned forward as I passed. Moss and lichen clung to its cracked surface, but I could see the shadow moving behind it. I froze. It mirrored me exactly. Every step, every turn. I jerked back. The shadow vanished. Fog. Silence. My pulse was deafening in my ears. The fresh graves loomed ahead, dark soil shifting slightly under the weight of something unseen. Footsteps continued to circle, patient, deliberate. I stumbled toward a larger mound in the center of the new plots. My flashlight flickered across its surface. Handprints pressed deep into the soil. Fresh, deliberate, waiting. The whisper rose in volume. "See us? See us? my stomach twisted. I crouched, brushing soil with trembling fingers. It gave, soft, almost pulsing. I could feel presence beneath it, cold and patient. The fog swirled, shadows stretching toward me, folding over stones, elongating impossibly. I stood, breath ragged, backing toward the main path. Footsteps followed, delicate, pacing in rhythm with mine, always stopping when I froze. Shadows flitted between tombstones, bending around stones I hadn't noticed before. My flashlight caught glimpses, small, crouched forms that vanished the instant I blinked. I could hear whispers, overlapping, layering, faint, insistent, patient. Every step I took felt like trespassing in a place that had long forgotten the living. I reached the edge of the cemetery, heart hammering. The fog thinned slightly here, but the presence remained, pressing, patient. Footprints ended abruptly at the boundary, and yet I could sense eyes, hundreds of them, unseen but aware. The fresh graves stood like sentinels, perfect and empty, yet each one seemed alive, charged with expectation. Shadows flitted behind tombstones, bending and twisting, always staying just beyond sight. I paused, listening. Silence. The whispers had receded, but the memory of them lingered, curling in my chest like smoke. The footprints behind me had vanished, leaving the ground untouched. Yet I could feel them, close, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, leaving the row of new graves behind. The old stones loomed silently, indifferent, yet I could feel their gaze following me, the shadows moving just out of reach, always circling, always patient. I glanced back once more before exiting. The central mound of fresh dirt shimmered faintly in the fog, handprints pressed deep, waiting. The shadows flitted between tombstones like smoke, impossible angles, impossible speed. I shivered. I knew the cemetery had noticed me, not just me, but my curiosity. Every step I took, every glance I made, it had recorded, stored, waited, and tomorrow, when I returned, I feared the footprints would multiply. Shadows would twist closer, and the whispers would grow louder. I left the cemetery, boots crunching on frost-hardened gravel, fog curling around my legs. Behind me, the tombstone stood silent, yet I could feel the weight of the unseen eyes pressing from every corner. Footsteps had vanished, whispers had faded, but the memory remained, burning into my chest. Something had moved behind the stones while I walked, always just out of sight, always deliberate. The cemetery gates loomed behind me, silent, still, empty, yet I knew better. The shadows were patient, the dirt alive, and the whispers waiting. Footsteps behind the tombstones had followed me, and I knew in the quiet of my mind they would follow me again tomorrow. I thought the cemetery had nothing left to show me. The fog was thick, curling around every tombstone like smoke from some unseen fire. My flashlight barely cut through it, and each step sounded impossibly loud against the frost-hardened dirt. I was halfway through the old section, where the stones leaned at crazy angles and moss had claimed their faces, when it began. A whisper, soft at first, almost drowned by the wind. Then another, closer, clearer. James, my name. I froze, heart hammering. No one else was supposed to be here. The gates behind me were locked, the paths empty. My flashlight flicked wildly across the graves. Shadows shifted too quick for the eye, sliding between stones, pausing, waiting. Sarah, Tom. The names weren't random. They were familiar. People I had read about in the old police reports. Names from missing person flyers stuck in dusty corners of my office. Some were decades gone. Some I knew were still alive, or should be. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was a wind carrying fragments of old conversations. But the whispering was deliberate, urgent. My stomach nodded. Whoever, or whatever, was speaking, it knew me. I took a cautious step forward. The fog pressed closer, cold and damp against my face. The whispering followed, circling me now, overlapping, layering. James, Sarah, Tom, you came. I gripped the flashlight tighter, feeling its weight anchor me to the earth. Footsteps echoed softly behind the stones. I spun. Nothing, only fog, curling and twisting, hiding something that was never there and yet somehow always present. I crouched over a grave, brushing my gloved fingers against the dirt. It was freshly turned, though I had walked this path countless times before. The whispering grew louder here, closer, almost urgent. "Look closer," my pulse thundered. I froze. There, etched into the soil, faint but distinct, were letters, names I had seen before, scratched in with some fine, deliberate hand. Not recent, but not old either. Each one a pulse of memory, of fear. I stepped back. The shadows shifted again. This time, not between the tombstones, but around them, weaving in impossible arcs. Shapes bent and stretched where no shape should be. My flashlight caught glimpses. A small hand, a fleeting face, blurred and unformed, and then nothing. The whispers were almost chanting now. Syllables overlapping. "James, listen, they wait." I swallowed hard, feeling the cold press into my chest. I followed the sound, moving between the gravestones, careful not to touch the soft dirt of the new graves. Every name called out made my skin crawl. Every whisper sounded like a finger tracing the back of my neck. I realized the names weren't just floating. They were layered over one another, creating an impossible crowd of voices. Some begged, some accused, all watched. A sudden clatter behind me made me whirl. A loose stone had tumbled from an old tomb, hitting the frost and skittering across the earth. I shined the flashlight toward it. Nothing, only fog curling and twisting, hiding the source. The whispers paused for a breath, then continued, louder. "James, they see you." A cold wind ran over my neck. I shivered. I hadn't noticed the air shift so suddenly, and yet the tombstone seemed to lean toward me, almost imperceptibly. I pressed forward, toward the heart of the oldest section. The whispering grew more insistent, rising and falling, urgent, melodic, impossible to ignore. "Come closer." Here. The shadows around me began to move differently, slower, deliberate. Shapes appeared at the edge of my vision. Fleeting, never fully formed, almost human, almost not. Every step I took was mirrored by a soft echo behind the stones. Footsteps without bodies, names without voices. I stopped at a row of graves older than memory. The soil was cracked and dry, the stones leaning. Yet something stirred beneath the surface. The whispers piled over each other, overlapping names, rising in tone. "James, Sarah, Tom, they're waiting." I crouched, flashlight beam flickering over a headstone. I thought I saw a face, pale, twisted, silent, staring at me from between the cracks. My stomach knotted. When I blinked, it was gone. Only the whispers remained. I reached out to touch the stone, brushing moss from the inscription. My hand trembled. The letters under my fingertips were not just worn. They were forming, shifting, spelling names I didn't recognize but felt horribly familiar. The whispers intensified, circling my ears. "They know, they see you belong." My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but my boots were glued to the frost-hardened earth. I was anchored here, caught between fear and curiosity. Then the whispers changed. Not names this time, just one word repeated. "Open." My flashlight flickered. I glanced around. The shadows, previously just flitting between tombstones, now leaned forward, almost pressing into the fog, surrounded me in subtle ways, bending toward me with unnatural patience. My pulse raced. What was I supposed to open? The ground? My mind? The air itself? I moved forward again, toward the newest graves. Fresh soil, dark and warm in the cool night. Footprints led to the center of the row and ended abruptly. The whispering circled me, louder, pressing. "Open, you know how." I crouched over the dirt. My hand hovered. The soil pulsed subtly, like it was alive, waiting for me. My fingers itched to touch it, and I felt the pull, magnetic, terrifying. Names spun in the fog, layering on top of each other. James, Sarah, Tom. "Open, open." A sudden gust of wind slammed against the tombstones. Shadows flitted wildly, spinning, stretching, merging, and I ducked instinctively. The whispering exploded. Dozens of voices, one behind the other, layered in impossible harmony. I pressed my ears to the soil. The names were in my head now, echoing inside me, wrapping around every thought. I realized the cemetery was alive in ways I couldn't comprehend. Every whisper, every shadow, every fresh mound of soil was conscious of me. I stood, backing away slowly. The fog clung to my legs like a living thing. The whispering continued, more insistent, melodic, impossible to ignore. "James, you see, you here, you belong." I shone my flashlight across the graves. Shadows bent around the stones, impossible angles, faces half seen and vanishing. A fresh mound of soil pulsed slightly, and I knew without knowing how that something waited beneath it. Something aware of me, something patient. I stepped toward the edge of the cemetery, heart hammering. The whispering followed, layering over itself, building in intensity. "James, open, come see." I glanced back at the graves I had passed. The shadows had settled now, still and patient, wrapping around the tombstones. Footprints pressed subtly in the soil, faint but deliberate. The whispers receded slightly, curling into silence like smoke. But I could feel them, still present, still watching. I left the oldest section behind, stepping toward the main path. The fog thinned slightly, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed from every corner. The fresh graves waited, silent but alive, handprints faintly visible in the soil. Shadows flitted between tombstones, bending impossibly, curling into forms I couldn't comprehend. The whispering faded, but the memory of it burned in my chest, a pulse of dread that followed every heartbeat. At the gates, I paused, boots crunching on frost-hardened gravel. Behind me, the cemetery lay silent, but I knew better. The names, the whispers, the shadows, they hadn't left. They were patient, watching, waiting for the next night, for the next visitor, for me. Something had moved beneath the soil while I walked. Something had called to me by name. I stepped through the gates, the fog curling around my legs. Footsteps and whispers had vanished, but I could feel them still, pressing just beyond sight, waiting for the moment I returned. I woke to the sound of my own breathing. Or maybe I imagined it. The air was too still, too clean, like someone had scrubbed the world while I slept. My flashlight lay cold and useless on the ground, the fog from last night gone, replaced by a pale, fragile morning that made the shadows seem softer, almost forgiving. But the cemetery, my eyes searched it desperately, was empty. Every tombstone I remembered leaning, every mound of soil I had traced with my fingers, gone. The freshly turned graves I had watched over, the names I felt etched into the earth, they were gone too, as if I had dreamed the whole thing, or maybe worse, as if the earth had swallowed itself overnight. My boots scuffed lightly on the frost, but the footprints I'd left last night had vanished as well. No trace of me, of anything, remained. I should have felt relief. I should have laughed at my own imagination, at the terror that had gripped me. Instead, there was a silence heavier than the fog I'd known. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic. Nothing moved. My throat tightened. The cemetery felt aware, waiting. I realized I couldn't trust my senses. Nothing was as it had seemed, and maybe it had never been. I walked slowly along the paths I had memorized. The familiar route twisted in unfamiliar ways. Stones that had once leaned differently. Shadows clung to shapes that weren't there before. My pulse thudded in my ears. I called out, half laughing, half demanding, "Hello." My voice sounded wrong, echoing strangely, swallowed before it could reach the edges of the cemetery. The air didn't carry sound, and yet I felt it press back at me, deliberate, expectant. Then I noticed the soil, perfectly flat now. Not a lump, not a depression, not a scratch. My fingers hovered over the ground, but even as I reached out, I felt nothing. No pulse, no warmth, only emptiness. I wanted to grab the dirt and shake it, to prove it had been real, but my hands passed through it as though it had never existed. A shiver ran down my spine. Maybe it hadn't. I took a step back. My boots crunched on frost, and I noticed the sound again, my only companion in a world stripped of everything else. I remembered the whispers, the names, the shadows between the stones. Where had they gone? My mind tried to rationalize, try to find some explanation. A prank, a dream, sleepwalking. But every rational thought dissolved under the weight of my own memory. I had seen them, heard them, and now nothing remained. A light breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth, though no soil was disturbed. My eyes darted to the horizon, expecting to see fog rolling back in, shadows creeping once more, but the day remained unnaturally still. Birds circled in slow, mechanical arcs above, silent except for the faint flapping of wings. Something about their movement seemed deliberate, observing me. I swallowed hard, realizing I wasn't alone. Not in body, perhaps, but in presence. Something watched. Just beyond vision, I walked to the center of the oldest section, where the whispers had been strongest. Every grave I had marked with attention was gone. Dirt flattened, stones in place but inert, like puppets without strings. My hand hovered over a headstone, trembling. It was smooth, untouched, no evidence of last night's events. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no sound came. Even the air seemed to swallow it, leaving me alone with my panic. The thought that had first crept in now screamed. Was it all in my head? I tried to recall details. The way shadows had moved, the names whispered, the handprints in the fresh soil. But every memory felt slippery, like water slipping between fingers. I remembered touching the soil, feeling it pulse, but now my hand meant nothing. My mind fought to hold on to reality, but reality had shifted and I was unmoored. I turned slowly, scanning the cemetery. The gates in the distance, once rusted and threatening, now looked normal, innocuous, almost inviting. I wonder if I had imagined the creaks, the weight of them swinging open on a non-existent wind. The air was still, but somehow oppressive, pressing on me. The ground was smooth, even lifeless. And yet, I knew the whispering had been real. My skin prickled at the memory of it. The sound of my name carried across the fog. A sudden movement caught my eye. A shadow, perhaps, or a trick of light. Impossible to tell. It flitted across the distant stones. Too quick, too purposeful. My heart leapt. I swung my flashlight toward it, but the beam found nothing. The fog from last night was gone. The cemetery bathed in a pale, indifferent light. And yet, the sense of being observed lingered, like a weight pressing on my back. I turned slowly in a circle, expecting to see what? Something tangible? I wasn't sure anymore. I stumbled along the paths, boots scraping against frost-hardened dirt that betrayed no sign of the night before. I remembered the shadows between the tombstones, how they had moved as if alive, how the names had called to me. A part of me wanted to deny it, but my body remembered the shivers, the nausea, the hollow dread. Nothing could erase that, and yet nothing remained to prove it happened. I paused near a row of fresh graves, dirt smooth, stones unmarked, footprints non-existent. I pressed my hand against the ground, cold, empty, and yet beneath that emptiness I felt it. Not a shape, not a hand, but a presence. Patient, watching, waiting. A low vibration hummed at the edges of my consciousness. The echo of names that should not exist, that were gone, that were never here. I stepped back, heart hammering. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the edges of my coat, brushing against my neck. I spun. No one, nothing, only the day, pale and indifferent. And yet, the weight of something unseen lingered. A question pressed into me. Had it all vanished, or had I simply been allowed to see it once and now it retreated? I walked toward the gates, the periphery of the cemetery feeling unnaturally vast, like the world had stretched while I slept. Every step echoed, an empty drum in the hollow morning. I glanced back one last time. The graves, the shadows, the whispers, they were gone. Or perhaps they were always waiting, hidden just beyond perception, waiting for me to return. My hand touched the gate. Cold metal, solid, unyielding. I pushed against it. It swung open easily, almost too easily. I hesitated. Did I want to leave? Did I even want to return? My mind clung to the memory of whispers, of names, of shadows that moved between the stones. I wanted answers. I feared them, but the silence outside the gates pressed closer, and the weight of the morning fell heavy in my chest. I stepped out, leaving the cemetery behind, or perhaps stepping into a different kind of prison, one where memory and reality collided. The fog had lifted entirely, the sun weak but rising, indifferent. The world seemed normal, untouched, and yet I carried a residue of last night with me. The whispered names, the shadows, the impossible soil. Proof had vanished, but the fear, the dread, the certainty that something had watched and waited remained. I looked back once. The cemetery lay still, quiet, ordinary. I could have laughed at my own terror, but the memory of names whispered into the darkness kept me rooted, a trembling witness to something I could no longer see. My mind questioned itself. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing grip? Yet the dread in my chest, the cold press of awareness at the nape of my neck, told me otherwise. Whatever had been there had not left. It was patient. It waited. And I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that the next time I returned, it would speak again. The alley smelled of damp concrete and old smoke. I stepped over a puddle that reflected the faint flicker of a broken streetlight, and the shadows seemed deeper than they should have been for 2 a.m. I tightened the straps of my jacket, not because I was cold, but because my nerves had started pricking the moment I turned the corner. Graffiti stretched across the brick walls, jagged letters layered over older, faded tags. I froze for a moment. One of the symbols looked different, cleaner, fresher, but when I blinked, it had shifted slightly, a diagonal stroke elongating, a curve curling where it hadn't been before. My heart thumped. I shook my head. It had to be my imagination. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind me. Not mine. Heavier, slower. I spun. Flashlight cutting a narrow beam to the fog, creeping up from the sewer grates. Empty. Just the alley. Empty and stretching further than I remembered. My pulse picked up, a cold weight pressing on my chest. I forced myself to keep walking, boots squeaking on wet asphalt. Another glance at the graffiti. No, it wasn't the same. The letters I had seen before had twisted into shapes that almost looked like faces. Faces that weren't there a second ago. My hand brushed against the wall, rough brick biting my fingers, and I tried to shake off the creeping unease. A sudden clatter to my left made me jerk around. A metalcan rolled across the alley, sparked briefly in my flashlight. Nothing else moved. No wind, no rat, no living thing. I exhaled slowly. Maybe the alley just had its own rhythm. Maybe my mind was tired. I reached the midpoint where the alley narrowed, the walls closing in like elbows pressing together. The graffiti seemed denser here, overlapping layers, almost like it was watching me. I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a smear of black shifting along the wall. But when I looked directly, the wall was bare, bricks cold and unyielding. A whisper, soft and fleeting, carried along the damp air. I froze. The alley was supposed to be empty. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand. Did someone speak? Or was it just the sound of the alley breathing, echoing itself back at me? I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice lodged somewhere in my throat, heavy and reluctant. Further down, the graffiti now looked purposeful. Letters formed symbols I couldn't place, angles that suggested eyes, teeth, even movement. I stepped closer, curiosity gnawing at the fear. The closer I got, the more the shapes seemed to ride, shifting just outside the corner of my vision. I blinked, and a new tag had appeared. A single word, watching. My pulse jumped. Who had done this? The alley had been empty when I started, and there hadn't been time for anyone to tag this. I scanned the perimeter. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching long under the weak streetlights. Nothing stirred, yet the feeling of eyes pressing from the walls pressed back. I moved on, careful, boots scraping the concrete. Every step sounded unnaturally loud, echoing like gunshots in silence. A shape shifted at the far end of the alley. A figure? My mind filled in the gaps. But the alley remained empty. The graffiti shimmered, a ripple across the bricks, as if the wall had drawn a breath and exhaled behind me. I turned a corner into a dead end. The walls here were covered in layers of paint, some peeling, some wet with moisture. Letters twisted into jagged shapes, angular and hostile. I felt the weight of the darkness pressing down, and my breath caught. Something in the patterns made my skin crawl, like watching a mouth move without hearing sound. A faint scratching, rhythmic, echoed from the bricks. I strained to listen. It wasn't the graffiti. Something else. Something behind the wall. I stepped back, heart hammering, flashlight trembling. The shadows pooled more densely now, shapes blurring, almost like they were alive. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn back, but curiosity, dread-laced and stubborn, kept me rooted. Then, a shift in the graffiti. Lines stretched into shapes I had not seen before, letters bending unnaturally. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the word leave stared at me. Sharp edges, deep black against faded red. I swallowed hard. Who, or what, was speaking to me through the wall? A soft footstep behind me. I whirled around. Nothing. The alley stretched empty. My flashlight flickered. In that moment, the graffiti on the wall in front of me rippled again, as if it breathed. I leaned closer, the letters forming a sentence that made my stomach tighten. You are here. I stumbled back, tripping over uneven concrete. The sound of boots echoed behind me, closer, heavier than mine should be. Panic clawed at my chest. I spun again. Empty. The alley remained unchanged, still. The message lingered, sharp in my vision, yet impossible to touch. I forced myself to walk, faster now, boots scraping, flashlight darting. Every shadow seemed to move with me. Shapes flitted just beyond perception. Edges of walls where darkness pooled too densely, corners where light should have reached but didn't. I could feel presence pressing closer, and yet each time I spun, the alley was empty. Halfway down the alley, a sudden shift. A word appeared where none had been. Run. The letters pulsed, almost alive, pressing at the edges of my vision. I backed up instinctively, knocking against a trash bin. A metal clang echoed, bouncing off the walls, and I realized the alley had become too silent. Every sound exaggerated, every shadow threatening. I forced my legs to move, step by step, closer to the exit. My breath came in short gasps, the night pressing down with a tangible weight. A line of graffiti stretched along the wall, letters I had seen only moments before, now spelling my name. My blood ran cold. How could this be? I didn't recognize anyone around, didn't hear anyone speak, and yet there it was. The exit loomed ahead, a faint glow where the streetlight broke through the alley. I sprinted, boots thudding, heart hammering. Behind me, a low murmur seemed to crawl along the walls, brushing against my ears. Shapes flickered at the edges, letters bending in impossible ways. I didn't dare look. I reached the street, lungs burning, and turned back once. The alley lay empty, still silent. Graffiti stared at me, normal now, faded tags and peeling paint. No words, no messages, nothing to hint at the terror I had just experienced. I swallowed hard, hand shaking, but I could still feel it. The weight in my chest, the subtle prickle along my spine. Whatever had been there, whatever had whispered and watched, it had not left, not entirely. The alley was silent, but I knew it remembered, and I knew, deep down, that it would be waiting. I took a step back from the curb, forcing myself to breathe. The city beyond hummed with life, indifferent to the twisting terror of a single alley. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow, every corner, every wall in that narrow passage had eyes, and they had followed me. And the graffiti, I could still see it behind my eyelids. Letters curling, shifting, alive, watching, waiting for the next time I returned. I didn't know if I wanted to, but I knew I would. I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air, heavier somehow, like the alley had exhaled and sucked the warmth from my lungs. My flashlight traced the walls, scanning the graffiti that still shimmered faintly in my memory. Every letter, every curve, felt like it was holding a secret, waiting for me to step closer. Then I saw it, a figure hunched at the far end of the alley, pressed low against the wall, too thin, too angular, its back curved in a way that wasn't natural. My heart stuttered. I raised a flashlight, the beam trembling. The figure didn't move, but something about it whispered danger, not with sound but with intention. I stepped forward, boots scraping concrete. Each step made the shadows ripple, the walls bending slightly at the edges of my vision. The figure's head turned slowly, just enough for me to catch a glint of something like eyes, or the suggestion of eyes, dark and reflective. Then it vanished, not behind a corner, not into the darkness. It melted into the wall itself, bricks swallowing it like it had never existed. I froze, every instinct screaming that this wasn't real. But my flashlight caught the faint distortion in the wall, a ripple as though something had passed through water. I leaned closer, reaching out with a hand that shook despite my efforts to stay calm. The bricks were solid, cold, unyielding. Nothing there. A sound behind me, soft and deliberate, made me spin. Footsteps? They weren't mine. Slow, hesitant, brushing against the edges of the alley. Empty. Always empty. The shadows pooled in the corners, stretching long, watching. I felt eyes along the walls, in the cracks, in the spaces my mind didn't want to see. The graffiti shifted again. Letters I had studied the night before bent and curled, forming something new. Leave now. It spelled jagged and urgent. I swallowed hard, chest tight, but the urge to see, to understand, was stronger than fear. I moved forward, flashlight trembling. Every step a battle against a growing terror in my stomach. Then it appeared again. The hunched figure, crouched low, waiting as if it had known I would come. The shadows clung to it, making its outline blur. I blinked. When I looked back, the wall was bare. The figure had vanished. My pulse hammered. Every nerve on edge. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a trick of light, a misalignment of memory and perception. Maybe the alley had always been alive, always shifting. But then, the faint echo of a rasping breath, too quiet to belong to me, brushed my ears. My skin prickled. I wasn't alone. I forced myself onward. The alley narrowed again, walls pressing closer, shadows pooling unnaturally. Shapes flickered at the edges of the beam, dark angles that shouldn't exist. A corner ahead seemed darker than the rest, swallowing the light. And there it crouched again, hunched, waiting. Something moved behind it. Another figure, a shadow flitting against the wall. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. The darkness stretched, alive, bending, reaching. I took another step, boots scraping, and caught movement at the periphery. Something slithered along the wall, dissolving before I could focus. The hunched figure's back arched in a way that made my stomach twist. It turned, and the silhouette was distorted, too tall, too narrow. Then it was gone again, bricks swallowing a whole. I could feel the air shift, a pressure like the alley itself was breathing, shifting around me. A whisper, low and deliberate, wound through the darkness. I couldn't make out words, just a sound of intent. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, I thought I saw dozens of figures hunched along the walls, pressed against the bricks. When the light returned, nothing remained. I stumbled, forcing myself to move faster. Each step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls in irregular patterns. The alley seemed endless, stretching further than I remembered. Shapes flickered just beyond the edge of vision. The hunched figure or figures followed, always just out of reach, slipping into walls or shadows. I reached a section of graffiti that had been untouched before. Letters twisted into shapes that almost looked like limbs, crawling across the wall. "You are not alone," they spelled. I swallowed hard. My flashlight trembled in my grip. Something pressed against the edges of my mind, cold and deliberate, like a presence leaning close. Another movement. The figure hunched lower, melding into the wall. I blinked. When I looked again, the wall was solid. A chill ran down my spine. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my curiosity was relentless. I had to see where it would go, what it wanted. The alley narrowed even further. Shadows thickened, pooling unnaturally. The figure crouched again, edges flickering, as if it existed between moments, between breaths. I raised the flashlight higher, trying to pierce the darkness. Its outline twisted and bent, body arcing impossibly. Then it vanished once more, leaving only a distortion of brick, a ripple that caught the light briefly. I felt eyes everywhere now, in the cracks, in the shadows, in the shapes of the graffiti. I couldn't tell if they were mine or theirs, but the sensation was real, real enough that my boots hesitated on the concrete, heart hammering. Another sound behind me, a soft, deliberate scrape. I spun. Nothing, but the air felt thicker, heavier. The alley seemed alive, breathing around me. The walls stretched and warped, subtle curves forming where there should have been corners. The hunched figure had gone, but the presence lingered, pressing close, unseen. I forced my legs to move faster, boots scraping the concrete. Every shadow seemed to ripple. The walls were no longer flat, letters twisting and bending, forming jagged shapes that pressed forward, almost reaching for me. I caught a fleeting glimpse of a face, or something like a face, emerging from the wall, eyes hollow, expression unreadable. Then it disappeared. The hunched figure returned, crouched low in the corner ahead. This time, it seemed closer, pressing against the wall inhumanly. I froze. For a moment, the alley was silent except for the soft scrape of my own boots. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, yet the sense of threat was palpable. A whisper tickled my ear, unintelligible but deliberate. I spun, flashlight cutting wide arcs through the alley. Nothing, but the walls seemed to ripple, letters shifting in patterns that made no sense. Shapes elongated, folded, bent against themselves. The figure was gone, yet I could feel it, pressing close, hunched just beyond perception. I stumbled forward, each step a battle against fear. The alley stretched, longer, narrower, impossibly so. Shapes moved at the edges of vision. The figure crouched again, then vanished into the wall. Letters twisted into words I couldn't read, curling around themselves, watching. One seemed to spell before collapsing into indecipherable shapes. I ran. My boots pounded the concrete, flashlight beams swinging wildly. The walls bent and warped subtly with each step. I felt breath against my neck, cold and deliberate. I spun again. Empty. Only the alley remained, stretching and twisting unnaturally. I reached the exit. A faint glow of the streetlight beyond. I turned back once. The alley seemed normal. Graffiti faded to simple tags. Bricks cold and unyielding. No hunched figure. No distortion. Nothing. But the sensation lingered. The weight of eyes pressed along the walls. Shadows pooling unnaturally. I could still feel it. Every corner, every edge of darkness had remembered me, watched me, hunched and waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to calm. The city beyond hummed, indifferent to what had unfolded. Yet I knew the alley would never truly be empty. And I knew, deep down, that the hunched figure would return, waiting, watching, always just beyond perception. I didn't know why. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew I had to come back. The first crackle was soft, like a whisper pressed against the edges of my consciousness. I froze mid-step, hand tightening on the radio. The alley was quiet, too quiet, as if the city had paused just to watch me. The static buzzed again, louder this time, and I thought I heard my name. Kashif? I jerked the radio away from my chest, heart hammering. It wasn't possible. The frequency was dead. No calls, no dispatch. Yet the voice had been clear. My own name, carried through the hiss of static, like someone was standing just behind me, inside the radio itself. I pressed a button to respond, but only more static answered. The sound twisted, shaping itself into words I didn't want to hear. Names I didn't recognize, some familiar, some long gone from the city. Each one carried a weight, a memory that made my chest tighten. I could feel the hair on my neck, standing on end. I shook the radio, half expecting it to fall silent. Instead, it crackled again, softer now, almost coaxing me. Behind you, I spun. Nothing, just the alley stretching, walls glistening faintly under the flickering streetlight. My boots scraped against concrete, echoing too sharply. The static hissed, insistent, teasing. Look closer, closer. My pulse rattled in my ears. I raised the radio, shining its beam like a flashlight. Shadows clung to walls, curling around graffiti, the cracks, the bricks. The voice continued, fragmenting, layering over itself. Names, places, memories I thought I'd buried. And then a laugh, faint, broken, like it was coming from 100 yards away, and yet directly inside my skull. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. This had to be interference. It had to be someone, some prank. But every rational thought dissolved the moment the static whispered again. Do you remember the first one? The alley seemed to shift. Shapes pooled in corners, blacker than the darkness around them. My flashlight caught them for a fraction of a second, just enough to make my stomach twist. I felt eyes pressing from the bricks, from the shadows themselves. The radio hummed against my chest, alive, not a device. Something else, something sentient. I stumbled forward, tried to reach the end of the alley, tried to escape the weight of the sound. Names poured through, one after another, a torrent I could not block. Some were familiar, lost in time. Some I had only read about in the paper. Faces blurred and headlines forgotten. All of them whispered, demanded attention. Pressed against my ears, my brain, my sanity. A crackle, sharp and sudden. The voice, my name again drawn out deliberate. Kashif. It wasn't coming from the speaker now. It was behind me, cold and low, a brush of air along my collar. My heart skipped. I spun, empty, only the alley, only concrete, only shadows. I cursed under my breath, shaking the radio violently. Static hissed, then split into two distinct voices, overlapping, arguing, coaxing, taunting. You left him, one said. You promised. The other, the walls rippled slightly, the graffiti curling in shapes I didn't recognize, letters twisting into faces. Faces mouthing words I could not hear. I forced myself to move. Step by step, the radio pressed to my ear, the static climbing, shaping itself into something recognizable. You can't leave. The hairs along my spine rose. My eyes darted around, catching movement in the corners. Shadows flitted, hunched, pressing against the bricks, only to vanish the moment I focused. The static wasn't random anymore. It guided me, pulled me toward the center of the alley, towards something unseen. I dropped to my knees, fumbled with the radio, trying to turn it off. Nothing worked. Button stuck. The device pulsed in my hand, warm, almost alive. Crackle, whisper, hiss. Words formed. The figure is watching. I froze. The alley seemed impossibly long now. Shapes gathered in the shadows, pressing closer. I could see them at the edge of the flashlight's beam, hunched, angular, impossibly still. And then a whisper coming not from the radio but inside my head. Do you see me? I jerked the device away. The static hissed louder, faster. Names spilling, fragments of sentences, memories I didn't want to revisit. Someone's voice soft begging. Another screaming, all of them overlapping in a chaotic chorus. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, as if the air itself had grown dense and heavy. A sharp pulse ran through the radio, and suddenly everything was silent. Just a pause, a breath, a weight pressing on my chest. Then a single word drawn out deliberate. Outside. I looked toward the alley's exit. The streetlight beyond shimmered, the edges flickering, and there, just beyond the threshold, a shadow hunched, darker than the night, waiting. My breath caught. Step by step, I approached, flashlight cutting weak circles through the darkness. The radio crackled again. Names, memories, voices layered on top of each other. But one voice was distinct, unmistakable. My own, whispering, distorted, do not follow. I froze. My mind screamed, but curiosity, that inexorable need to see, pushed me forward, step by step, toward the hunched shadow. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, yet it was alive in every sense. Watching, waiting, the radio pulsed violently in my hand, crackling, emitting static that formed letters in midair, or perhaps inside my vision. You could not leave now. A sudden shift. The alley stretched again, walls bending imperceptibly, bricks seeming to breathe. The shadow hunched lower, elongating, edges flickering. The air pressed tight, filled with static, with sound, with a sensation of unseen eyes. I wanted to run. My feet refused. Another pulse of static, and the figure was gone, not vanished, absorbed into the wall. The radio hissed, then a single whisper. Behind you. I spun. Nothing. Only the alley. Only concrete. Only shadows. Yet the weight of it lingered. Presence. Watching. Knowing. Guiding. My hands shook, gripping the radio as if it were the only tether to reality. I took a step back, then another. The flashlight caught the walls again. Graffiti twisted subtly, shapes forming, faces forming, letters curling into forms that mimic movement, and the radio, alive in my hand, pulsed again, words formed inside the static. "You are not alone." I stumbled. Every step felt like wading through thick water. Shadows flickered, corners pressed, the static hissed. Names spilled faster now, voices overlapping, memories colliding. One voice screamed, sharp, accusing. Another whispered, soft, coaxing. All demanding, all insistent. Then sudden silence. The air hung still. The alley seemed normal, bricks flat, graffiti mundane. The radio fell silent. My pulse hammered in my ears. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I forced myself forward, toward the streetlight beyond the alley. The city beyond hummed, indifferent, but I knew the radio wasn't done. I could feel it inside me, pulsing, alive, whispering, waiting for the next name to form, the next memory to surface. And deep down, I knew it would call again. The fluorescent lights buzzed in a way that felt wrong, sharper than usual, like the building itself had grown taller overnight and stretched toward me, pressing down. I adjusted my jacket and tried to convince myself I was just tired. Another graveyard shift. Routine, but the air smelled heavier, metallic and cold, like the hallways were breathing through the walls. I stepped inside, boots echoing against the tile, each sound unnaturally loud. Shadows clung to corners, stretching longer than they should. I flicked the lights along the corridor. Flicked, but one didn't come on. My eyes caught the seam in the wall. A faint line that wasn't there yesterday. Or had it been? I told myself I was imagining things. The elevators hummed as if thinking, the buttons glowing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Something shifted in the ceiling tiles above me. Was it just settling, or something taller? Watching, I shook my head. Focus, it's just another shift. Just walk the floors. My radio crackled. Static first, soft, almost comforting. Then a whisper, too faint to make sense. I raised it, pressing the button, expecting silence. Nothing answered, only the static pulsed against my chest. Names, old names, maybe lost to time, floated inside the hiss. I swallowed. My hands shook. I started the patrol. First floor. The reception desk was empty, cleaner than it should be, polished, sterile. But the lights flickered as I passed, shadows crawling across the walls like black fingers. I blinked. The corridor behind me looked longer. The far exit door, where I swore I left it yesterday, seemed taller, warped, its frame bending on itself. I reached the stairwell, flashlight cutting a thin line through the darkness. Steps echoed as I climbed, each one slower than the last, though my legs were fine. The air was thick here, heavier, and I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. The building watching me, listening, and then the first shift in perspective. The stairwell, familiar yesterday, was now narrower. Too narrow, the walls closer. At the second floor landing, the lights flickered out entirely. My flashlight caught it. Something hunched in the corner, just a shape. No detail, only the suggestion of movement, as if the shadow breathed along with me. I held my breath, blinking, waiting. It didn't move further, didn't vanish. Just hunched there, patient, waiting. My radio hissed static, forming letters I didn't want to read. Closer, I forced myself forward, each step echoing too loudly. The office doors were closed, identical, yet each felt taller. The frames warped. I passed one and froze. The nameplate wasn't what it should have been. I swore I'd read maintenance yesterday. Now it spelled something else, scribbled, jagged, almost alive. My hand trembled as I touched the brass plate. The metal felt warm, pulsing. Footsteps behind me. Soft, careful, not my own. I spun. Nothing. Just a long hallway. Shadows curled into corners. The static on the radio hissed louder, whispering now, shaping words. Do not leave. My pulse slammed in my ears. I shook it off. Focus. Just another graveyard shift. I pressed on. The third floor was different. Taller ceilings. Fluorescent tubes stretched longer than possible. Their light too bright in one corner, too dark in another. The walls seemed to lean inward, not outward. I passed the break room and the coffee machine was on, steaming, though no one had been there. And the smell, coffee yes, but burnt, rotten coffee. My stomach twisted. A door cracked open ahead. No wind, no one inside, but cold draft brushed my face, carrying whispers, names, long dead, maybe missing. I blinked, stepping closer. Shadows stretched from the room, reaching for the hallway, the walls curling around them. My flashlight trembled in my hand, but the beam caught something. I couldn't name it. Something hunched, impossible angles. Inside the room, and not inside the room at the same time, static erupted. The radio screamed a name I hadn't heard in years. Kashif. Sharp, slicing through the hollow hum of the building. My knees shook. I pressed a device to my ear. More words. The same whisper, overlapping, growing into a chorus. You cannot leave. Do not leave. I forced a laugh to steady my breath. It's just static, I told myself, gripping the railings as I descended toward the basement. The lights flickered overhead, shadows pooling on the walls, twisting like liquid. The hum from the ceiling grew louder, almost musical, almost a chant. The building was alive, watching, waiting. At the basement landing, the lights went out completely. My flashlight barely cut a circle in the darkness. And then I saw it, hunched in the corner, beyond corners. The shape shifted, impossibly, crawling along the walls like smoke. My radio hissed again, forming words. Closer. I stumbled back. My boots scraped concrete, echoing too sharply. The shadow didn't move, yet moved. It pressed, leaned, hunched, expanded. I felt my lungs tighten, the air heavy. The static became a voice, my voice distorted. Do not go further. I tried to turn, to run, but the hallway had changed. Taller, narrower, bending in on itself. Doors stretched, walls leaned, the ceiling higher than memory. The radio pulsed violently, a heartbeat, a presence. Words formed. You see it now? Step by step, I forced myself forward, heart hammering, aware that each step warped the space around me. Shadows moved in response. Static pulsed, names whispered. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Faces attached to my mind, memories I couldn't place. The building had grown overnight. The shift wasn't physical. It was aware, watching. I reached the far wall. The fluorescent tube above hummed violently, flickering out. The shadows converged. I blinked. The hunched figure was gone. Just air, just bricks. And yet the sense of presence remained, heavier than the building itself. My radio whispered one final message, slow, deliberate, shift complete. I sank against the wall, trembling. Floor tiles normal, hallway normal, but my chest still pressed by the weight of something unseen. The building felt taller still, stretching beyond reason, beyond logic, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the shift wasn't over. Not tonight, not ever. The static continued, faint now, lingering, whispering names I didn't want to hear. I pressed the button, tried to call in. Silence. The building listened, but no one answered. And as I left the basement, step by step, the walls seemed to lean just a little closer, shadows curling toward me, patient, waiting for the next shift. The corridor stretched ahead, longer than it had any right to, and the fluorescent lights flickered like warning signals. I could hear the faint click of a lock somewhere, but no one had been there. My keys jingled in my pocket. They didn't matter. They never mattered. I reached the first door, the metal frame cold under my fingertips. I pulled, expecting resistance. It didn't budge. I tugged harder, heart hammering. The handle turned, just enough to give hope, then locked, itself with a sharp, final snap. My breath caught. No one was inside. No one was there to lock it, yet it was impossible to open. I stepped back, flashlight slicing the darkness. The hallway behind me seemed longer now, walls leaning closer. Every door I tried behaved the same, locked from the inside. Even though the rooms were empty, the metal felt alive under my hand, warm, pulsing, like the building itself had learned to trap me. I forced myself to keep moving, floor by floor. Each corridor twisted subtly, the geometry shifting with every step. 1 minute, the walls were straight. The next, they leaned inward, crowding me. I passed a window and thought I saw someone on the other side, hunched, waiting, but when I blinked, it was gone. I could feel it, though, the presence following me, watching. Static hummed faintly in my radio. I pressed a button, expecting the usual silence. Instead, words cracked through the hiss, "Do not leave." I spun, scanning the hallway. The doors rattled as if breathing, hinges moaning. My pulse surged, but I forced myself to focus. Locked doors meant I was contained, but contained could mean safety, could mean understanding. A corner shifted as I passed. Not in the walls, exactly, but in perception, like reality bending around me. Another door slammed shut somewhere behind me, muffled yet loud, echoing through the corridor. I tried turning back. That hallway was gone, replaced by another, identical but different. The building was alive, reorganizing, learning. I stopped at a stairwell. The doors before me locked themselves just as I approached. My flashlight flickered violently. The hum of the radio grew louder, forming another phrase. Closer! It was not coming from the radio. It was in the walls, the floor, the air itself. I could feel it pressing at my ribs, urging me to move, to understand, to descend. Each landing I reached felt foreign. The stairwell spiraled in ways it hadn't yesterday. I counted steps, then recounted. I lost track. Numbers no longer mattered. I heard my own voice on the radio, distorted, whispering. "You are trapped?" I gripped the railing, steel cold but vibrating beneath my hands, like a heartbeat not my own. A door to supply closet yawned open, shadows spilling out. I stepped inside, hoping for a moment's relief, and it snapped shut behind me. Locked. No handle on the inside. Just walls pressing close, shadows leaning in, stretching along the ceiling. The radio hiss was static, almost screaming my name. My chest tightened. This was no ordinary shift. I kicked the door. Nothing. I shouted. Nothing but echoes. Yet the walls themselves seemed to pulse in response, expanding and contracting, swallowing space and returning it differently. I realized in that escape wasn't about finding a door. It was about reading the space, understanding how it moved. I stepped forward into the corridor, now impossibly long, doors lining both sides. Each handle felt warmer than the last, vibrating faintly. Static whispered again, "Do not leave." My hand shook. I tried to ignore it, but the pressure built, pressing at the back of my skull. A door to the left rattled violently, then opened by itself. I froze. Darkness beckoned inside, thick and heavy like liquid. Something shifted in the hall behind me. Not a shadow, not a shape, but a subtle movement. Floorboards tilting, walls breathing. My radio crackled once more. Closer. I realized with horror that it wasn't just the building trapping me. Something else was inside, moving with it, bending reality around me. I forced my feet to move, stepping into the open door. Darkness swallowed me, the air thick and wet. I felt fingers of cold brush my arms, though no one was there. The door slammed shut behind me. Impossible. I spun, but the hallway outside no longer existed. I was inside a room that wasn't a room. The walls leaned inward, floors rippling like water frozen mid-wave. The radio hissed violently, forming words I didn't recognize. My own name appeared multiple times, layered, distorted. "Kashif, do not leave, do not leave." My knees buckled. I pressed the device closer, trying to catch meaning. And then I realized the building was talking to me, teaching me, mocking me, threatening me. I tried the walls. Concrete solid, but somehow pliant. My hand pressed and sank slightly, the surface giving like thick rubber. Behind me, a door emerged, smooth and black, no handle. I turned. The figure I had glimpsed before, hunched, impossible angles, slid into view between wall and shadow, watching. It didn't move toward me, yet every nerve screamed its approach. Static erupted again. Closer, follow, trapped. My body obeyed, stepping forward toward the black door. Every step distorted the room further. Walls stretched, ceilings bent. The figure followed, just beyond clarity, hunched and patient. I felt the building itself shift with my heartbeat. Doors locking, unlocking, corridors bending. I was part of the machinery now. Unwittingly, step by step, the door in front of me opened. Inside, the floor was carpeted in darkness, thick and soft. The figure vanished. Relief? Maybe, but the radio hissed one last time, whispering a phrase that crawled into my bones. Shift complete. The door behind me disappeared. The corridors behind, identical but impossible, were gone. I was alone. I sank to the floor, chest heaving, flashlight trembling. The building was quiet now, too quiet, but I knew it hadn't stopped. It wouldn't stop. It had grown taller, stranger, impossible. And whatever lurked inside, between walls and shadows, through locked doors, was patient, waiting for the next shift, the next step, the next patrol. And I realized the locks weren't random. They weren't malfunctions. They were invitations, tests, and I didn't know if anyone could ever pass them. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to remember which way I came. Hallway normal again, door standard, light steady, but the cold lingered, the static beneath perception, whispering names I hadn't heard in years. One curiosity remained. If the doors could lock themselves, what else could the building do? What else could it hide? I pressed the elevator button again, but it didn't light. The metal panel was cold, indifferent. I stared at my reflection in the small smudge of glass above it, and that first moment made my chest tighten. I moved my hand to scratch my neck, and the reflection didn't follow. It smiled when I frowned, tilted its head when I stayed still. I blinked hard. Maybe tired eyes played tricks. But when I shifted, my reflection stayed. It lingered, watching, waiting, separate from me. I took a step back. The floorboards creaked, an almost apologetic sound, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The reflection tilted forward, mocking. Its eyes sharper than mine, alive in a way that terrified me. The hallway stretched longer than usual. Mirrors were everywhere now, even where they shouldn't be, on walls, doors, even ceilings. Each one offered glimpses of me, or versions of me that weren't me. In one, my shoulders were hunched. In another, my eyes were darker, hollowed. And in each, the subtle movements betrayed a consciousness independent of mine. I tried ignoring them, moving forward. My flashlight bounced across the walls. The illuminating peeling paint warped wood. My reflection didn't match my steps. It paused, crouched, smiled with teeth I didn't own. I shook my head, telling myself it was fatigue, hallucination. Yet when I glanced at a mirror while running my hand along the railing, it raised a finger, pointed at me, and the chill struck bone deep. The radio crackled faintly. Not voices, words, though I shouldn't understand them. You see us, now we see you. I whipped the device closer. The static hissed like a warning, layering over my own heartbeat. Mirrors lined the stairwell too, reflecting endless versions of me. Some versions weren't even in my body language. They moved with intent, independent thought. I paused at a landing. One reflection was staring at me, not mimicking. Its mouth moved. I heard nothing, yet the fear it exuded was deafening. My hands shook on the railing. The reflection stepped out from the glass, fingers curling as though reaching. I recoiled, heart racing. My reflection shouldn't leave glass. It shouldn't step into the world. Yet here, the impossible pressed in. I tried moving past it toward the next door. Every mirror now became a portal. Each reflection wavered, stretched, and advanced in subtle, jerky motions. I ran down the corridor, flashlight sweeping erratically, shadows peeling off walls, joining the mirrored shapes. The mirrors multiplied, reflections splitting, merging, each one more twisted, more deliberate. One door had opened by itself. Relief, maybe, but when I glanced back, my reflection followed me, walking outside the glass now, but still somehow tethered. The radio buzzed violently, words slicing through the static. Do not run. You are ours. I stumbled over a floor seam, knees scraping, and felt a hand, my hand, brush my arm. I froze. Nothing was there, yet the sensation lingered, electric, insistent. I ducked into the room. Mirrors covered every wall. My reflection multiplied infinitely. I raised my hands, and the reflections did not. They stood still, watching, tilting heads, whispering with mouths that moved but produced no sound. The air smelled metallic, acrid, thick with fear. My flashlight flickered, and in one sudden sweep, the reflections lunged, dissolving into the glass, only to reappear closer, sharper, more human. Panic set in. I tried to cover my eyes, but the shapes persisted at the corners of my vision. One reflection laughed, my own voice, yet not mine. The sound was guttural, low, vibrating the bones. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall, and felt it shift under pressure, soft, almost breathing. The room itself seemed alive, complicit with the mirrors, bending angles and lengths, closing exits, forming labyrinths that trapped me. I forced myself forward toward a single door. The reflections didn't follow immediately. They waited, patient, forming a ring around the room in their glass prisons. I hesitated. My reflection on the far wall moved first, stepping to the side, beckoning. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed danger, but the door was my only option. As I approached, mirrors on the ceiling rippled, one shattering silently midair, sending shards floating unnaturally, suspended. I ducked, heart hammering. The reflection mimicked my motion with a delay, jerky, mocking. I could feel its presence behind me, without turning. A shadow detached from the wall, elongated, leaning toward me. I spun, flashlight swinging, nothing tangible. Only mirrors, infinite, distorted, waiting. I reached the door. It didn't lock, but as I grasped the handle, another reflection appeared behind it. In the next room, pressing palms to glass that wasn't there. I jerked back, letting go. My hands trembled violently. The room seemed to pulse, floorboards rising, bending, then snapping back into place. Static hissed again. You could not leave, you never were alone. I swallowed bile, chest tight. Mirrors began to appear where none existed. Behind me, under me, inside walls. My reflection multiplied endlessly, each version more deliberate, moving with purpose. I felt a cold brush against my neck, involuntary shiver. I dared not look, yet I knew it was there, present, patient, and alive. I sprinted, corridors elongating unnaturally, reflections aligned, merging, forming grotesque approximations of me with sharper angles, hollow eyes, predatory stances. Each step I took, they followed, sliding closer, dissolving, reassembling. The radio buzzed and hissed violently, but in the static, words coalesced. We are you and you are not. I stumbled into a larger room, mirrors hanging from ceiling beams, walls, and floor, floating impossibly. My reflection was gone in one, present in another, gesturing wildly, screaming without sound. I sank to the floor, breathing ragged. I realized then that I wasn't moving through the building. I was moving through them, through versions of myself I didn't recognize. The boundaries dissolved. A mirror cracked, small at first, then rapidly spiderwebbing across its surface. From it, a hand emerged, impossibly thin, reaching toward me. I recoiled, hard in my throat, and it retracted, leaving a cold echo on my skin. My flashlight fell to floor, rolling to the center, illuminating only fragments of the reflections. My own face stared at me from every angle, eyes wide, watching, but none were truly mine. I crawled toward the door, each step mirrored by countless others. My arms burned, knees scraped raw. Another static-laced whisperer came through the radio. Join us forever. I shook my head violently, forcing myself upright. The mirrors swayed, tilted, the reflections leaning out, inching toward me without leaving their surfaces. Finally, the door loomed. I grasped the handle, shoved it, and it opened. The corridor beyond was empty, normal, silent. Relief surged. I sprinted, glanced back once. The mirrors were gone, reflections vanished. Only the faint hum of the radio remained, static now, whispering fragments of my name. My chest heaved. I was alive, yet a lingering unease remained, deep in my bones. The reflections were patient, waiting, not gone, just biding time, observing, learning. The building would see me again. And next time, I knew, The mirrors would not merely reflect, they would act. I stepped forward, into the corridor, aware that normalcy was fragile. I could feel it in the air, in the walls, in the silence between heartbeat and breath. Something had watched me, and I was changed. I stepped out of the building, and the air hit me differently, like it had stretched and bent while I was inside. The city lights flickered, not in the usual rhythm, but in a slow, deliberate pulse, as if someone were breathing through the streets. My watch read an hour later than it should, though I swore I'd been inside only minutes. Something about the world felt wrong. The crosswalk signals blinked in odd patterns, not the usual walk-don't-walk rhythm. Cars moved sluggishly, engines hummed low and flat, tires whispering against the asphalt. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe fatigue, maybe the long shift had done this, but when I looked up, the skyline was subtly wrong, taller, narrower, windows that I knew didn't exist before. The city had grown, shifted while I was inside. I started walking, but the sidewalks twisted beneath my feet. Faces passed me, blurred, and when I blinked, some were missing, replaced by strangers I didn't know. My chest tightened. Each step forward felt heavier, and the world seemed to expand and contract around me. Streetlights flared and dimmed in irregular beats, and the familiar hum of the city had changed. Deeper, more oppressive. I glanced at my phone. The screen showed a map, but the streets weren't the streets I knew. Names shifted as I looked. Buildings I recognized appeared and disappeared depending on the angle. I could feel the air pressing, thick and watching. Every step I took, every breath I drew, seemed to echo somewhere unseen. A shadow moved at the corner of my eye. I spun, expecting a pedestrian, but the street was empty. Only the faint vibration of the city, irregular, like a pulse out of sync. I pressed forward, my legs moving faster than my mind to comprehend, the city reshaping itself around me. Doors appeared where there were none. Storefronts twisted, their windows reflecting scenes that didn't exist, showing rooms I'd never been in. I heard a low hum, almost a chant, threading through the air. At first I thought it was the wind, then realized the hum carried words, distant, half-formed. Names I recognized, names I had never spoken aloud, whispered in tones that pressed against my skull. I tried to shake it off, but the sound threaded into my bones. I ducked into a side alley, hoping for a straight path back home. The alley was narrower than it should be, walls stretching higher, shadows pooling where none should be. My reflection in a puddle below moved wrong, lagging a heartbeat behind, twisting unnaturally. I clenched my fists, willing myself to ignore it. Every time I blinked, the alley seemed to elongate. A street lamp flickered and went out. Darkness pressed in, thick and warm. I stumbled forward and saw a figure ahead, just a silhouette, standing in the middle of the street. It didn't move like a person. Its limbs were slightly off, angles too sharp, posture too rigid. My pulse spiked. I considered turning back, but the path behind me had vanished, replaced by more twisted streets that led to nowhere. The hum grew louder, the words clearer. They weren't just names anymore. They were sentences incomplete, as if someone or something was narrating my life to me in fragments. He should not have left. Time bends around him. Watch the world. I shook my head violently. The city shifted with every glance. Cars I knew were parked elsewhere now in impossible spots. Signs pointed in directions that defied logic. I ran, my feet pounding the warped asphalt. The figure followed, always just at the edge of perception. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, converging corners and under streetlights. I felt my own breath in the silence, each exhale dragging with weight. The sidewalks became corridors, bending toward the horizon, streets folding over themselves. The world I had left behind in normality was gone, replaced by a distorted echo of itself. I reached a familiar bridge, or at least I thought it was familiar. Its arches twisted unnaturally, railings stretching into impossible lengths. My reflection appeared in the water below, but this reflection smiled before I did, tilted its head before I moved. Panic clawed at me. I pressed forward, but the bridge seemed to lengthen endlessly, fog rising from the water below in slow, deliberate columns, obscuring the city beyond. The whispers coalesced, louder now, words I had no business hearing, Details about me I had never shared, about my life inside the building. My hand shook as I grabbed the railing. The fog thickened, forming shapes, figures just beyond recognition, moving, watching. The bridge had become a liminal space, neither here nor there, suspended between the world I knew and whatever this had become. I forced my legs to move, stepping carefully along the warped planks. With each step, the reflections in the water grew sharper, showing me possibilities I hadn't lived, versions of myself shaped by unseen hands. Some stared, accusing. Some reached, beckoning me into the water. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing, heart hammering. Time itself seemed wrong. My watch ticked backward for a moment, then forward. Seconds stretched, minutes compressed. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the city's hum, echoing back as someone else's whisper. Names, phrases, unfinished sentences. He cannot leave. The shift never ends. Watch the world. I reached the other side of the bridge, or what should have been the other side. The streets opened into a square I knew well, but the buildings were taller, darker, edges sharper. Windows reflected the sky wrong, clouds moving in impossible directions. My surroundings were familiar yet alien, as if the city itself had learned to mirror my unease. I sank against a wall, pressing my forehead to cool stone. The air vibrated softly, words brushing against my mind. Each whisper was familiar and foreign, like someone reading from a book that hadn't been written yet. My reflection in a nearby glass pane moved of its own volition, tilting its head, smiling as though it knew secrets I couldn't yet grasp. I tried to orient myself. Streets I had walked 100 times were now a maze. Buildings merged into each other, alleys curling back in impossible loops. The city had become aware, bending around me, reshaping the trap to observe. Panic bubbled, but I forced it down, breathing step by step. Keep moving, keep moving. A clock tower struck somewhere distant, but its chimes were irregular, uneven, stretched between seconds. My own heartbeat echoed it. Quick then slow. The world outside the building was not the world I had left. Everything was delayed, accelerated, warped. Every face that passed held a shadow in their eyes that knew what I could not. I walked on. Every intersection was a question. Every street lamp flicker a warning. The hum persisted, threading through my bones, whispering fragments. And through it all, a terrible clarity grew. Leaving the building had not freed me. It had opened the city's eyes to me. Every mirror, every reflection, every surface could now be watching, learning. I paused on a familiar corner, the dread curling around me like smoke. Normal streets stretched before me, yet I knew they were only a semblance. The city pulsed subtly, edges shimmering, as though reality itself were a veneer, delicate and broken. My reflection in a shop. Windows smiled before I did, tilting its head in that same impossible motion. I knew, somewhere deep, that the shift was not over. Leaving the building had changed nothing. The world outside was now a landscape of dread, a city attuned to me, and the whispers, oh, the whispers, would follow, trailing my steps, waiting for the next moment of weakness. And as I stepped forward, each echo of my name brushing against my mind, I understood. The day I left was only the beginning. The world itself had shifted, and I had no way back to normal. Not yet, perhaps never.